Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Broccoli Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Soul Shifter Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The dark trees whipped past as Aizawa silently raced through the burning forest, the scent of smoke and chemicals burning his sensitive nose. He strained all his heightened senses for any sign of Midoriya, hoping that he would reach his problem child before any of League. Although the clouded sky prevented any illumination from the moon from reaching the forest floor, the underbrush was as clear as day to his nocturnal eyes. As his paws quietly thrummed against the ground, Aizawa was glad of his choice to assume his soul animal form. As a panther, it was much easier to hunt prey, or in this case, a student with a penchant for finding trouble, in the night than as a human underground hero. Even his well-honed skills and experience of many years fell short of a natural-born predator. Just then, with a flicker of green lightning, Midoriya raced into the clearing. As Aizawa closed in on his student, he assessed the kid for injuries and was extremely unhappy with what he saw. Both of Midoriya's arms were a mangled, bloody purple, and the rest of his exposed skin was covered in raw scrapes and bruises. He looked to be developing a black eye, and Koda was clinging tightly to the kid's back, but looked relatively unharmed. As Aizawa approached, Midoriya must have sensed his presence, something that sparked a sudden flare of pride behind his stern facade, and snapped his attention over to the panther leaping out of the bushes. The kid's quirk flared bright as Midoriya fell into a defensive stance before recognition flickered to light in his eyes as Aizawa erased his quirk. "Sensei!" The kid called in relief, then whispered underneath his breath in awe, "You're like me." And Kami, if that didn't send off warning bells in Aizawa's head. Before the dawn of quirks, humanity was able to soul shift, an interesting phenomenon where extreme stress allowed people to shift into the form of their soul animal. These powers were particularly limited, as it was exceedingly painful to shift, and the animal form could only be assumed at maximum once a week after extensive training. However, once quirks appeared, only those with weak quirks or the quirkless retain the ability to soul shift, and only after experiencing a traumatic event or abuse. Powerful quirks became beloved by the public, and shifters were cast aside, mocked, and belittled, as people believed that the ability to soul shift was proof of weakness and inadequacy. Soul shifters were forced into training in order to regulate, and in most cases repress, their abilities, and were required to register their soul animal and extent of training with the government. Although technically illegal, employers, schools, landlords, hospitals, and cops frequently discriminated against shifties, or enies, and Aizawa had been on several raids where those with more rare, dangerous, or even extinct soul animal forms had been subjected to experimentation or trafficking. All of this information flashed in his mind as he began to worry for his problem child. For it seemed that Midoriya was a soul shifter, and Aizawa, perhaps more than anyone, knew what that entailed. On its own, being a soul shifter wasn't that much of a concern. Plenty of reputable heroes were shifters, including himself, his husband Mike, and his friend Midnight. However, Aizawa had not seen Midoriya marked as a shifter in his file, which meant one of two things. Midoriya could have recently discovered his form, but this was unlikely. Most shifters discovered it before high school, and Aizawa or others of Midoriya's class had been around the problem child during the school year's most traumatic moments. Aizawa certainly would have known if Midoriya had suddenly shifted during one of these times. The second and more likely option was that Midoriya was hiding the fact that he was a shifter. Aizawa was inclined to believe this was the case, as Midoriya had clearly not intended anyone to hear his particular comment, but his panther ears had caught it. There were several possible reasons for this. It wasn't advertised that shifters could be pro-heroes, and Midoriya could have hidden his shifter status because he thought that it would disqualify him from being a hero. This was unlikely, as UA had a strict zero-discrimination policy, and accepted those of all quirk statuses, including the quirkless. In this society, 90% of the quirkless were shifters, so UA had unofficially stated that they accepted those too. Midoriya, with his passion for becoming a hero and his habit of extensively researching anything that pertained to his chosen career, would have discovered this. A second option was that his problem child had a rare form and had hidden his status for fear of being targeted. This certainly explained why Midoriya was a trouble magnet, but as far as he knew, none of the villains had mentioned this fact. The final and most worrying option was that Midoriya was currently being abused and had hidden his status as it would expose what was going on. Aizawa hoped that this was not the case, but now that he thought about it, it made a terrible sort of sense. The problem child flinched at loud noises, seemed terrified of authority figures, and constantly apologized. All of this combined into a concerning picture, and Aizawa's heart clenched. How could I have missed this? He berated himself. Even more troubling was the fact that Midoriya was a shifter who also had an extremely powerful quirk, which was unheard of. It was one more problem due to the problem child, and he was determined to get to the bottom of it. However, it was something that needed to be addressed later, as there were more pressing matters to attend to. During his brief moment of contemplation, the problem child had started to ramble, something about muscular, which, Kami, could his student not catch a break? Koda having a water quirk and Kachin, and looked to be about to run off. Again. However, after a short warning growl, the kid stopped. He hoped Midoriya knew Morse code. Shifters in their soul forms could understand each other, but they could not speak unless the form allowed for it. At this moment, Aizawa was very jealous of Zashi's ability to talk while shifted. "You did it again, problem child," he coded, making a series of short, deep, grunting meows. "Did you learn nothing from Hosu?" Midoriya made as if to argue, which was good. It meant that he understood, but Aizawa cut him off. "There's no time. Give Koda to me. There's no way I'm allowing you to carry him in that state, and I'll go with you to Mandalay. Tell her that I give the students the ability to use their quirks to defend themselves as well as what the League wants with Bakugo. Then, you need to get safe and get medical care." "But sensei..." "That's an order, Deku." Aizawa silenced him with a quirked glare. At the use of his hero name, the problem child straightened, and he internally smiled at the sight. "I know you're worried about the rest of your classmates, but you can't help them if you're passed out. I'll get Koda to the other heroes, then round up the rest of 1A and 1B. I'm much better at tracking than you." Midoriya didn't look happy at that, but he nodded and placed Koda on Aizawa's back, who quickly grabbed his capture weapon. After making sure he was secure, Aizawa sprinted off toward camp, Midoriya on his tail. He hoped the rest of his class were all right. Hizashi knew, without a doubt, that the students were not all right. Anyone would be when what was supposed to be a summertime week of helpful training had turned into a fight for their lives. But as he looked across the table of one of UA's meeting rooms at his husband, he could tell that the students weren't the only ones suffering. Shouta had worked hard to maintain a cold, logical, and emotionless facade, but Hizashi was one of the few who could always read him. He could see the tenseness of his jaw, the whites of his knuckles clenched into fists on his thighs, and the way he sat incredibly, unnaturally still. He knew that his husband was blaming himself for everything that went wrong. Sure, the results weren't pretty, with 2 kids unconscious, 1 severely injured, 11 suffering from mustard gas poisoning, and 1 kidnapped, but Hizashi knew that without his husband, things would have been much, much worse. After Shouta had led Midoriya to Mandalay, he had rushed Koda to Vlad in the hopes of getting the kid out of the fight. After dealing with a clone of Dabi in the main building, he had returned to the forest to see that Midoriya was gone again. While looking for his problem child, he had managed to round up most of the students who had been gassed, and get Yaoyorozu and a ways away from a chainsaw Nomu. He had then come upon Midoriya with several of his classmates just in time to see Bakugo being dragged through one of Kurogiri's portals. Shouta had done everything right, but Hizashi knew that his husband wouldn't see it that way. The fact was, this wasn't supposed to happen. They had changed locations last minute and had alerted only a skeleton crew of heroes in order to prevent this exact scenario. But it hadn't been enough. There was only one way that the League of Villains could have known their schedule even with all of their precautions. UA had a traitor on their hands. But that wasn't Hizashi's problem at the moment. He was certain that Netsu had some sort of countermeasure in motion, and he would leave the retribution in the principal's capable paws. The rat would never let such an injustice go unpunished. For now though, Hizashi had a husband to comfort. As they both left the meeting room, Hizashi hung back and tugged his husband into an empty classroom. Zashi what dash? Shouda's surprised exclamation was suddenly muffled as Hizashi enveloped him in a tight hug. Resting Shouda's head on his shoulder, Hizashi pressed his forehead into his husband's hair. "I'm so glad you're okay," he said, concern and relief dripping into the words. "I was so worried when we got the call." "It's not okay," Shouta said bitterly, slowly returning the hug. "I should have done more." "It wasn't your fault," Hizashi refuted, pressing a kiss on the shorter man's forehead. "Be logical. Thanks to you, most of the students are safe and we have a plan to retrieve Bakugo. When has one of Nedzu's schemes ever failed?" "And that rat for forcing me to make a statement," Shouta grumbled but relaxed into the affection. "I hate dealing with reporters." Hizashi chuckled softly and began to gently card his long fingers through Shouda's tangled locks. "Well then, it's good that you've got media icon present Mike to coach you through it," Hizashi joked, smiling down at his husband. Shouta snorted but nuzzled Hizashi's neck, stubble gently scratching where his directional speaker usually rested. They stood in silence for a moment, enjoying each other's company, reassuring the other that they were there, that they were safe. Hizashi gently scratched Shouda's scalp, who pressed further into his touch. "Been a while since you shifted," Hizashi commented, noting how Shouda's nails were longer and his hair was softer and fluffier than usual. He scratched his scalp a little harder, and Shouta let out a rumble that sounded remarkably like a purr. Hizashi smirked a little at the light blush tinting his husband's cheeks. Shouta had always been embarrassed with some of his more animalistic traits post-shift, but Hizashi thought it was adorable. "I can't imagine what the students thought when a full panther jumped out of the undergrowth." Shouta groaned, shoulders slumping forward and leaning further into Hizashi. "That reminds me, I think Midoriya is also a shifter," he remarked. "Your problem, child?" Hizashi responded, trying to recall if he was one of the listed shifters of the class. "I don't remember that on his file." "That's the thing," Shouta sighed. "I think he's hiding it. I only know because I heard him muttering that I was, like him, when I found him for the first time." "That doesn't bode very well," Hizashi said worriedly, mind running through the possible reasons. "None of them were very good." "I know," Shouta said, frustration evident. "I should have noticed." He flinches at loud noises. "How did I miss this?" "Midoriya's smart, and he's probably had a lot of time to learn how to hide," Hizashi soothed. "But you know now, and I know that you'll do everything in your power to help the little listener." Shouta hummed, but relented. Suddenly, Hizashi brightened. "Oh, we can teach the listener how to shift. It's been so long since we've shifted together. It'll be so fun." "You said he knows Morse? That'll make things much easier. I wonder what form he has. I bet it's something cute. What if dash?" He babbled excitedly but was cut off when Shouta pressed a quick kiss to his lips. "Thanks, sunshine," Shouta said, affection clear in his tone. Hizashi smiled, the small, soft one that was so unlike his present Mike grin, and returned the kiss. He should have known that his attempts to lighten the conversation hadn't gone unnoticed. Shouta always said that subtlety wasn't his specialty, especially when it related to caring for his husband. "Anything for you, kitten," he responded, staring deeply into dark eyes that had retained a hint of feline features. Shouta held his gaze but soon moved away from the hug, shifting to hold hands and intertwine his fingers with his husband's while heading towards the door. "We can deal with the problem child later. I'll talk to him once we've got the dorm system in place. But for now I seem to remember some lessons with present Mike that I need to be attending soon," Shouta said, seeming a little less tense and more ready to continue Nedzu's plan. Hizashi laughed and followed behind. "Of course, can't keep a celebrity waiting after all," he said, huffing a bit when his husband jabbed him with a sharp elbow in his stomach. "I'll teach you all you need to know about how to handle the vultures." He would always help Shouta any way he could, either as the pro hero, radio host, and teacher present Mike, or as the shifter, husband, and confidant Yamada Hizashi. Izuku was extremely nervous. To be fair, it was his most natural state of being, but his ever-present anxiety had peaked to new levels when Aizawa-sensei had asked to meet with him once he finished unpacking his room. He knew it had been too good to be true for he and the rest of the Kamino rescue group to get off with only the threat of expulsion. Honestly, he was surprised that Sensei, who was infamous for his strict teaching, tough grading, and extensive expulsion record, had not kicked anyone from the class yet. Although, after the stunt that Mineta had pulled in the hot springs, Izuku thought it was likely that the pervert was going to be barred from the hero course soon. But of course, his luck hadn't held, and now Aizawa-sensei had singled him, the problem child, out. He had been so excited to move into the dorms too, and All Might had thankfully accepted his explanation that his mom had been working overtime in the aftermath of the Kamino Ward disaster and couldn't meet his teacher in person, and it was true, she was out working, even if she had been working overtime for years, ever since he didn't get his quirk, but he didn't think about that. Mom loved him. He was knocked out of his internal thoughts by his arrival at his teacher's door. Sensei had a room on the ground floor of the dorm, as did the other homeroom teachers with their respective classes. According to Aizawa-sensei, it was apparently illogical to leave 20 of you hellspawn unsupervised. You all cause me enough trouble when I can see you. I shudder to think of what you can get up to when left to your own devices. Trembling, Izuku took a stuttering breath in and knocked on the door. Sensei soon opened the door and led him inside. Problem child, he grunted, and Izuku held in his flinch at the nickname. He was used to such things from teachers, even if Aizawa-sensei had been one of the better ones, go so far as to stop Kachin from attacking him on the first day. No one had ever stopped Kachin before. Sensei's room was more of an apartment, and was clearly still in the process of being moved into. He had a living room with an adjoined kitchen, and several rooms connected to a small hallway. There were still a number of cardboard boxes scattered about, but what was unpacked seemed comfortable and organized, with a surprising amount of yellow. Is yellow Sensei's favorite color? It makes sense, his goggles are yellow and they're the only part of his uniform that is colored. I'll need to add that to my notebook. His goggles really do need an update, they have no protection and he could add things like night vision and heat sensors. May would love to get her hands on them. And, is that a cat toy on the counter? Aizawa-sensei opened a door off the hallway and gestured for him to sit down on a couch in what was clearly his office. Izuku sat down stiffly and kept as quiet as he could. Teachers didn't like it when he made noise. Sensei sat across from him at his desk and stared at him for a moment. Before he could say anything, Izuku beat him to the punch. I am so sorry, Sensei, for Kamino. I've known Keikachin for a long time and I just wanted T to help. I didn't want the last time I saw him to be when Didabi was dragging him through a P-portal. I know that is no excuse, and I'll be happy to do any punishment you see fit. Izuku bowed his head low and didn't dare look up. I've been punished for doing less before, so might as well try and mitigate the damage by showing how apologetic he was. Aizawa-sensei sighed and Izuku peeked through his hair to see that he was pinching his nose. Oh no, did I make him upset? That was the opposite of what I wanted to do. Before he could apologize again, Sensei spoke. Midoriya, you're not in trouble, he said. I meant what I said outside. You all were incredibly reckless and it could have ended very badly for everyone. However, you did not engage in direct combat, you successfully got Bakugo out, and you are still learning how to be successful heroes. I can't, and won't, punish you for doing things we are in the process of teaching you. You will still have to earn my trust back though, understood? Izuku nodded, mind reeling. He wasn't in trouble? Sensei thought he had been acting as a hero? He almost couldn't believe it, but Aizawa-sensei didn't often lie, especially out of cruelty. But that left Izuku confused. Well, thank you, Sensei, but if I'm not in trouble, why am I here? He asked, his stutter becoming less pronounced as he relaxed slightly. In short, kid, you're here because you said something at the training camp that concerned me. He paused and looked at Izuku as if to prompt him. Izuku ran through all the things he had said at the camp while near Aizawa-sensei, but he couldn't think of anything that would warrant this kind of response. At his silence, Sensei continued. When you saw me in my soul form, you said I was, like you. What exactly did you mean by that, Midoriya? Izuku was stunned. This was the nightmare scenario. Sensei knew. I should have known that I couldn't keep secrets from one of, if not the best, underground heroes. He knows I can shift, so he knows, or would soon find out, that I had been quirkless. This was it. I'm getting kicked out of UA. I lied to pro-heroes, forged federal documents, and had never registered for government-mandated training. I am getting expelled. I am going to go to prison. That's what I deserve, right? I am a criminal. Cammy, what would All Might think? Of course he chose wrong, picked a criminal to hold one for all. I was lying to myself this whole time, thinking that I could prove myself. They were right, they were all right, I am just a useless, quirkless, stupid, Deku, an unevolved relic who should have died a long time ago, and I always would be. And now that Sensei knows I'm quirkless, he'll find out about one for all. Of course he will. I was stupid for thinking he wouldn't, and then I will have broken a promise to All Might. My hero, the #1 hero. I can't even keep a secret for myself. How could I think that I could keep a secret for All Might? And a state secret no less. And now Aizawa-sensei will know, all because of me. How could I have screwed up this badly? Izuku knew that he was panicking, but he couldn't stop. He was spiraling further and further into his own mind. Fear, anxiety, worry and paranoia welled up from below until it felt like he was drowning. His heart was racing, he couldn't hear, couldn't see, couldn't breathe. But even worse, with those feelings came a sensation that he hadn't felt for a long time. A sensation he had actively tried to hide and repress for years. No, not now. Not now. You'll just prove him right. But his coherency was long since gone, and the sensation crashed over him like an overwhelming tide. Blackness filled his vision, and now all Izuku could feel was terrible, twisting pain. Shouta was floored. He had assumed that Midoriya would have probably have a bad reaction to being confronted, but never in his wildest dreams had he considered this possibility. Because in the place of his problem child, who had been in the beginning stages of a panic attack, was a large feline with huge upper canines. Midoriya Izuku had the sole form of a saber-toothed tiger, and had shifted in the middle of his office. His surprise quickly wore off though, and he swiftly vaulted over his desk to reach his student. As he rushed to help the panicking predator, there was only one thought on his mind. Hang in there, problem child. Shouta thought this was among his top 5 most terrible meetings. Things had originally started out all right, and it was very enlightening to hear his problem child's muttered analysis of his favorite color based on his home decor. They really had to get his muttering under control, or get him some support gear that blocked out the noise. Information is a valuable tool after all. Yellow was actually his favorite color, as it reminded him of Zashi, but wearing black was more logical. It matched with everything, blended into the shadows, and hid bloodstains well. Midoriya also had some interesting ideas regarding possible upgrades to his goggles, and even Shouta had to admit that his eyewear was a bit old-fashioned. Maybe it was time to talk to Power Loader about improving them, and possibly invite Midoriya to the meeting. This stream of thought analysis had made him even more curious about what else Midoriya had in those notebooks of his. However, Shouta had become more worried once the meeting officially started. His problem child once again apologized excessively and seemed to think that Shouta had singled him out for more severe punishment. He had shut down that incorrect and concerning thought process as soon as possible, although it was another piece of evidence that Midoriya had been mistreated in the past. He would definitely have to investigate Aldra Junior High and his parents soon. However, once he had mentioned shifting, Midoriya had spiraled into a panic attack. This was distressing, but something Shouta could deal with. All heroes were trained in how to respond to those experiencing a mental health crisis, and as an underground hero he unfortunately had to practice those skills quite often. But the situation had gone from bad to worse, as his office filled with the disturbing sounds of an untrained shift, which are more drawn out and painful. Shouta doesn't think that he will ever get used to the crunching noises of bones breaking and the squelching sounds of organs rearranging. And Cammy, he hated that Midoriya was more afraid of him, his homeroom teacher, than any of the villains the students had faced in their traumatic school year. Shouta wanted to find and personally kick the butt of anyone who had taught his problem child that teachers were people to be feared. But that would have to wait, because he had a distressed saber-toothed tiger on his hands. As he vaulted over his desk, he was able to get a better look at Midoriya's soul form. Midoriya was about the size of a German shepherd with the awkwardly long legs of a teenaged feline, but his 4 limbs were thick and powerful. He was sure that when Midoriya was fully grown his soul form would be large, his tail was short, and his fur was a dusty brown, similar to a cougar. Unlike a cougar, however, his paws and his tail were dark, and he had horizontal tiger stripes on his legs. Shouta wasn't sure if the patterning would stay, or if it would fade like a lion's does as Midoriya matured. The fangs that gave feline its name were large and jutted about 2 inches below the lower jaw. His eyes had transitioned to a light green. The pupils were blown wide in his student's panic. Shouta crouched down a few feet away and tried to seem as non-threatening as possible. "Hey Midoriya, it's all right," he said in the most comforting voice he could muster. "You're in my office and we were just starting a meeting. Can you take a few deep breaths for me, kiddo?" Midoriya snapped his gaze toward him as soon as he started speaking, but didn't seem quite focused on him. The problem child tried to take a breath but had trouble, and made a keening noise in distress. "No worries, Midoriya, thank you for trying. I'm going to help you through a breathing pattern, all right?" Shouta said gently. "Can I touch you, kid?" Midoriya paused for a moment, then made a short jerking nod. He slowly reached out, keeping a close watch if his approach made anything worse, and set his hand on the feline's shoulder. Shouta took exaggeratedly deep breaths and rubbed matching circles on his problem child's back as he absent-mindedly noted that a saber-toothed tiger's fur was deceptively soft. "You're doing great, kiddo. Follow my breathing," he requested softly. "In through your nose for 5, out through your mouth for 7. He kept up the count and the reassurance until Midoriya's breathing became more regular and his pupils were less dilated. "You doing better there, Midoriya?" His problem child nodded. "Do you want proximity, contact, or space?" Midoriya thought for a moment, then tapped twice. "You want me to keep going?" he asked, inwardly pleased that Midoriya trusted him. He knew that pets always felt extremely nice when he was in his soul form and would forever deny that he pestered Zashi for them at every opportunity. The feline looked away as if embarrassed but made a short nod in agreement. Shouta transitioned to petting Midoriya's head and was glad when the problem child seemed to relax more. "Do you want to talk about what happened, kiddo?" he asked gently. "Sometimes it helps if you address it. But if you don't want to, that's totally okay, and we can discuss things another time." Midoriya seemed to think about it, then coded, "I can do it now." Shouta was surprised that the problem child's meows sounded remarkably like his own panther vocalizations. "Are you sure? There is no pressure?" he asked. Midoriya nodded again. "Okay, thank you, Midoriya. You are being very brave. Do you think you can shift back?" Midoriya stepped back a little bit and closed his eyes. Shouta waited as the feline sat, fidgeted a bit, then went still again before making a keening noise. "Okay, no worries. We can just wait until it wears out. Most shifts last a day at most, so you can stay here if you want until then. Unfortunately, this isn't really a conversation that should be held in Morse code." Shouta inwardly cursed that he couldn't shift yet, as it hadn't been a week since the training camp. Then he had an idea. "Midoriya, if you're okay with it, I know someone who can serve as a sort of interpreter," he said. "They have a soul form capable of speech." Midoriya thought for a moment. "Do you trust them?" "Kemi this kid." Shouta thought, heart swelling with the faith Midoriya had placed in him. "With my life," he responded, then hesitated before speaking again. "In fact, he's my husband." Midoriya's eyes widened. "I didn't know Mike-sensei could shift," he coded excitedly. Shouta startled. "How did you know Zashi and I were married, problem child?" he asked. Midoriya fidgeted uncomfortably. "You have a ring on a chain around your neck, and Mike-sensei wears one under his gloves. You were in the same class and have been friends since UA. Also, you act slightly differently around him than any of the other staff," he coded. Shouta stared, then let out an amused snort. "Congrats, you are the first of the students to figure it out," he said, smirking. "We'll both give you extra credit on your next exam." Midoriya spluttered. "It wasn't anything special, I just paid attention. You don't need to do that." "You're remarkably observant, Midoriya. Don't downplay your own skills," he gently reprimanded, and Zashi and I have had that agreement since we started teaching. So, are you all right with him helping? Midoriya nodded, surprised at the subject change, and Shouta sent a quick text to his sunshine. Soon, there was a knock on the door and his husband entered. He had his hair pulled into a low bun with his prescription glasses balanced on the end of his nose and was wearing an English band t-shirt with skinny jeans. With his piercings, tattoos, and hearing aids. On full display, he looked unrecognizable when compared to his hero persona. Midoriya had dropped his jaw at the sight and Shouta stifled a chuckle at his expression. Zashi grinned gently and made finger guns at the problem child. Hey little listener, I heard you needed a shifter? When Hizashi received a text from his husband while he was wrangling their 2 cats, he didn't expect to be blindsided 3 different times. Not only had the famous problem child and one of his favorite listeners figured out the secret of their marriage, but he had also suffered a panic attack, shifted into his form of a saber-toothed tiger, and now needed a translator. As soon as he got the news, he hurried down the hall from their bedroom to Shuta's office. Upon seeing Midoriya's soul form, he had to hold back a squeal. The little listener was even cuter as a cat, and he was excited that Sho had a feline form buddy. But he knew this was a delicate time, so he tamped down his enthusiasm. After all, Present Mike was known for having a good rapport with citizens, victims, and even villains. Hey little listener, I heard you needed a shifter, he said, looking to his starlight for confirmation. Shouta nodded. It's not logical to have a conversation like this in code, he responded, then turned to Midoriya. You still okay with talking about this kiddo? Yes, the problem child coded, I'm tired of hiding. I'm proud of you kid, Shouta said, not making eye contact with Hizashi who was grinning cheekily at him. He softly clapped his hands and smiled wider at Midoriya. Alrighty then, one shift coming right up, he said, stepping backward while shaking out his shoulders. He handed his hearing aids and glasses to Shouta, then closed his eyes and concentrated on his connection to his form. The familiar pain came, but Hizashi simply gritted his teeth and pushed through, accustomed to the unpleasant sensation. Soon he opened his eyes, now with a perspective closer to the floor. He ruffled his feathers, then with a quick flap of his wings he was airborne. At the starstruck look in Midoriya's eyes, he did a few laps around the room before settling on his husband's shoulder. Shouta, used to this behavior, simply shifted so that they could both see Midoriya and ran a single finger down Hizashi's back. Midoriya finally seemed to snap out of his state of awe and went into full fanboy mode. Of course Present Mike is some sort of a parrot, I should have known. Judging by the size, the white coloring and the iconic crest, he's a cockatoo, but which species is the question? I wonder if his hero hairstyle was inspired by his soul form or if that was a coincidence. It's so cool that my 2 favorite heroes can shift. Why does he take his hearing aids out? Is it because Midoriya rambled but stopped when Hizashi let out a chirping laugh. Good analysis little listener. He praised in Japanese to keep Shouta in the loop. You are right, I'm a sulfur-crested cockatoo, and my hair was inspired by my form. But keep that on the down low. I don't want other DJs stealing my iconic look, yo. Midoriya giggled at that, and Hizashi and Shouta traded warm looks. He was glad that the kid was able to relax after his traumatic experience earlier. As for my hearing aids, the short answer is that I don't need them while shifted. As you might know, soul forms don't carry over injuries from our normal bodies, but you will still feel the pain, Hizashi explained, because I'm hard of hearing due to repeated exposure to loud noises, and not something I was born with. This form does not have the same injury and so I can hear just fine. I do have to be careful with my quirk though so it doesn't happen again, you dig? Midoriya nodded, and looked to be about to fire off another series of questions before Shouta held up a hand. I'm sure Hizashi would love to chat about your theories later, problem child, he said, getting the conversation back on track. Now, would you like for us to ask you questions or for you to go at your own pace? Midoriya quickly sobered and thought for a moment. I think questions, he said nervously, and Hizashi passed it along. Shouta nodded. We can do that. We won't force you to answer, and if anything makes you uncomfortable we'll stop immediately, alright? He said, looking to Midoriya for confirmation, then continuing. First, do you know what triggered the panic attack? Is that the first one you've had? The kid shook his head, and Hisashi's heart clenched. I've had a FUB before, he said, looking away. I just got so nervous, I didn't want to get found out. Have you ever seen anyone for them? Hisashi asked. No? They're not that bad, I didn't want to bother anyone, he replied, sounding confused. I can deal with them by myself. Problem child, that's not okay, Shoyuta said gently, and Hisashi could hear the sadness hidden in his tone. Just because you can deal with them doesn't mean there isn't a better way. You wouldn't be a bother, it is literally a therapist's job to take care of you and those type of issues. I'm sure Hound Dog would be happy to talk about ways to treat them. Midoriya looked unconvinced, but nodded. Shoyuta sighed. We'll get back to that, but what did you mean about being found out? He asked. Midoriya fidgeted. I didn't want people to know I am a shifter, he said quietly. I didn't want UA to be like B before. Hisashi's heart sank, and he exchanged a concerned look with his husband. What was before like? Hisashi asked softly. IW was a late B bloomer, Midoriya said nervously, eyes darting around the room. I was diagnosed quirkless at F4. I have the T-toe J joints. People aren't, very nice to the quirkless. Shoyuta in a breath at that. Hisashi felt the same way. He knew the statistics, high rates of bullying, abuse, and suicide. To think that bright, kind, sunshine Midoriya had suffered like that made him want to scream. Midoriya, when did your quirk come in? Shoyuta asked, and Hisashi could see the dread in his eyes. The D-Day of the entrance exam, he whispered. All of Hisashi's thoughts ground to a screeching halt. Excuse me, what the F dash? At their shocked silence Midoriya continued. The D-doctor said I could have blown off my limbs if I developed it any earlier. I did some T training for the exam that strengthened my body which allowed me to use it. Contrary to all appearances, Hisashi was extremely intelligent, especially about topics relating to quirk development and powerful quirks. It was a topic that hit especially close to home considering his traumatic, muzzle-scarred childhood. As far as he knew, the latest quirk development was 10 and had an extremely specific activation requirement. Get buff didn't seem like that type of condition, but Midoriya's superpower was in a league of its own, causing destruction on the level of All Might with devastating drawbacks. Maybe he was the first example of the quirk singularity, but something seemed off. He looked over to his husband who appeared almost horror-stricken. Midoriya, he said, staring intently at the problem child, I owe you an apology. Midoriya whipped his head around so fast Hisashi swore he heard his neck crack. He himself was similarly dumbstruck. His husband rarely apologized, preferring to do it right the first time. He said it wasn't logical to tread the same ground twice. Shoyuta continued. During the first day I was under the impression that you were a kid with a powerful quirk who thought he could skate by on talent alone without putting in an ounce of effort. Midoriya opened his mouth as if to speak but Shoyuta pressed on, sinking into a bow. You proved me wrong in your ball throw. Your strategy and quick thinking shifted my point of view on you to that of someone who had a great mind but not a lot of opportunities. I see now just how little opportunity you had. So, Midoriya, I am sorry for the incorrect assumptions I have made and any treatment of you that stemmed from them. Hisashi stared at his husband and wondered if Shoyuta could see the love in his avian eyes. Shoyuta would forever deny it, but he was a softie for his kids and would do anything to right a wrong. Midoriya was blinking fast as if to hold back tears, seemingly forgetting that felines couldn't cry. No teacher has ever said sorry to me, he sniffed quietly, then continued with more volume, you don't need to apologize, Aizawa-sensei. You are the best teacher I've ever had. Honestly, Izuku thought, this might be the best meeting with a teacher I've ever had. Sure, he'd had a panic attack and then shifted, but Aizawa-sensei didn't seem to care and only wanted to help him. He'd even got to see present mixed soul form and confirmation that Mike-sensei and Aizawa-sensei were married. But on top of all that, Aizawa-sensei had even apologized to him. A useless relic of a Deku. Aizawa-sensei really is great. He did the press conference for Kacchin and fought for us at the USJ, and he never hit me or berated me in front of the class or Wait, Midoriya, did you just say that your former teachers hit you? Mike-sensei asked, sounding distressed. He did not mean to say that out loud. Apparently he still muttered in soul form. Wasn't that bad really? He said quickly. I was always disrupting the class and I was a terrible student, so they had to punish me. It's my fault. Izuku, kid, Aizawa-sensei said, and Izuku startled. He had never heard such blatant concern from his teacher before. Even if you were the worst student they'd ever had, which I doubt, they should never, ever have hit you. That is assault and they should be arrested. What? Izuku was confused. But that's how it's always been? And I really did deserve it. Little listener, no, Mike-sensei responded sadly, that's not how it should work. Didn't you have other teachers that didn't hit you? Didn't they ever say anything? I guess not all of them hit me, Izuku said, thinking hard. This was turning out to be a very weird conversation. Don't Mike-sensei and Aizawa-sensei know how teachers were supposed to act? But they would punish me in other ways and they never did anything to stop it. Sometimes they would pretend I wouldn't exist or not tell the other kids to stop bullying me, or to stop bringing the spider lilies, or to stop defacing my desk. Other times they would encourage it. You were suicide-baited? Mike-sensei gasped, and Aizawa-sensei had gone pale. Izuku tilted his head. Yeah, he said, shrugging. Everyone knows that the quirkless are just unevolved weaklings that deserve to go extinct. Some were just more blatant about it than others. I think I got my first F-flowers in elementary school. Was it 3rd grade or dash? Izuku, I need you to listen to me, Aizawa-sensei said, and Izuku startled. He used my first name? You are not worthless. You are a human being and your life has meaning. You deserve to live. Everyone was wrong to tell you otherwise. You are a wonderful, hardworking, kind kid and I'm proud to have you in my class. I am so glad you didn't listen to any of them. You are so strong and so brave to make it this far. You are going to be an amazing hero one day. Izuku was dumbstruck. Here Sensei was overturning everything he had learned in his entire life. He searched Aizawa-sensei's face for any indication that he was lying, but all he saw was concern and care. Why you really mean that? He asked quietly. Both teachers nodded. We really do, Izuku, Mike-sensei said, and Izuku could hear the truth in his avian voice. He started trembling. But Aizawa-sensei cut him off. Kid, would you like a hug? Izuku stopped short, shocked, but after a moment of hesitation nodded. Aizawa-sensei slowly reached out, double-checking to make sure it was okay, and gently pulled Izuku into his lap. Izuku could feel his long arms wrapping around him in a comforting embrace, shortly followed by a soothing feathered weight pressing against his side. In the face of such overwhelming affection, unlike anything that he'd had in a long time, Izuku broke. He whimpered, trembled, sniffled, and fell apart in Aizawa-sensei's arms as his carefully constructed world crashed down around him. If he could, he was sure he'd be flooding Aizawa-sensei's office with tears. All the while he heard the soft, soothing voices of his teachers. You're okay, Izuku. Everything will be all right. You're safe, cub. Let it all out. They sat like that for a long time, until Izuku no longer thought his heart was breaking and his breathing had gotten back under control. You feeling a bit better there, little listener? Mike-sensei asked, and Izuku nodded. Izuku, when I call you problem child, do you think I'm like your old teachers? Aizawa-sensei said, looking down at him. Izuku stilled, trying to think of a way to deny it without making it seem like he was obviously lying, but Aizawa-sensei pressed on before he could say anything. It's okay, I think I know the answer. Izuku, students I don't like don't get nicknames. I call you problem child because you get wrapped up in a lot problems, not because you yourself are a problem. It obviously has negative connotations for you, so that name stops immediately. I never want you to feel uncomfortable in my class, understood? Izuku stared up at Aizawa-sensei with stars in his eyes. Aizawa-sensei is so cool. Mike-sensei snorted at that, and Izuku embarrassedly realized he said that out loud. Then he realized something. Wait, did you call me cub earlier? he asked, and he swore Aizawa-sensei flushed. I did. But if that isn't something you want he confirmed, and Izuku jumped in. No, it's great. I like it, he said, desperate to reassure him. I really like it. Sounds like you're going soft, Sho. Mike-sensei teased lightheartedly. Shut up, Zashi, Aizawa-sensei grumbled, dislodging Mike-sensei from his perch on his shoulder. Mike-sensei let out an undignified squawk at being displaced but soon settled back down. Izuku couldn't help but giggle at their antics, and his teachers both grinned at the sound. Izuku, you mentioned earlier that kids at your old school would bully you, Mike-sensei said, sounding reluctant to ruin the happy moment. You and Bakugo went to the same school, correct? Didn't he do anything to stop them? Aizawa-sensei inhaled sharply at that. Cub, this whole time I've thought that your relationship with Bakugo was that of a rivalry, Aizawa-sensei said, and Izuku felt a pit of dread open up in his stomach. But that's not the case, is it? He was your bully. You can't expel him. Izuku burst out. He'll make a great hero. I can't ruin his dream. So he did bully you, Aizawa-sensei said, and Izuku drooped. Sheet, I just confirmed it. Cub, any punishments I give Bakugo are a result of his behaviors, not yours. You are not responsible for him, all right? I am sorry I didn't put it together earlier, but trust me when I say I'll handle it, okay? Izuku nodded dejectedly. It wasn't all his fault though, he said softly. Ever since his quirk came in and mine didn't, no one ever told him no. They thought his quirk was perfect for heroics, so they let him get away with everything. He's gotten better at UA. Aizawa-sensei sighed. We'll keep that in mind, Mike-sensei said, but anything that happens to Bakugo is not your fault, you dig? Izuku nodded again. Kacchin is going to kill me. We'll deal with the Aldra school system and Bakugo later, Aizawa-sensei said, and Izuku let out a sigh of relief. For now, are you safe at home? What? Izuku yelped. They think Mom is abusive? Yes, I'm safe, Mom loves me. She'd never hurt me. It's okay, kiddo, Mike-sensei said gently. We just had to double-check, all right? Izuku took a deep breath to calm himself, ignoring the voice in his head that whispered, of course Mom can't hurt me because she is never home. With that out of the way, Mike-sensei continued, have you ever had quirk counseling or shift training? Izuku shook his head. I didn't want to give them another excuse to hurt me, Izuku said sadly, and Aizawa-sensei held him a little tighter at that. Well, we'll have to start on that, Aizawa-sensei said. You can start quirk counseling with Zashi. Aoyama and Kaminari have already been going to lessons with him. We'll have to update your documents about your shifter status, but if you want to keep it quiet you can do shift training with Zashi and I. Izuku whipped his head around at that. You do that for me? He asked, uncertainty clear in his voice. Both his teachers nodded. I wouldn't have offered if I wasn't sure, Cub, Aizawa-sensei reaffirmed. Izuku stared at him for a moment. Is this a dream? This is too good to be true. It's real, little listener, Mike-sensei said with a small chuckle, so I'll take that as a yes? Yes, please. Izuku said, nodding frantically. Thank you. Thank you. No need to thank us, Aizawa-sensei said, resuming petting his head. We're just doing our jobs. Izuku leaned into the affection and for just a moment found his thoughts free of worry. Maybe things really were looking up for him. Shouta looked up into the trees, keeping an eye for any sign of his white-feathered husband. As a way to burn off energy and get Midoriya more used to his soul they had headed to one of the wooded grounds in UA and let Zashi and the cub race down the trails. However, that wasn't what was on the forefront of his mind. He clenched his fists at his sides, feeling the white-hot fire of a combination of rage, shame, and concern burn through him. That disaster of a meeting had not only revealed the staggering amount of abuse Midoriya had suffered, but also highlighted ongoing problems that still needed to be addressed. Therapy was obviously top of the list, as the fact that Midoriya had talked about suicide baiting, and Kami, didn't that hurt to hear, that Sunshine Child Midoriya had been told to kill himself since at least the 3rd grade, in such a casual manner was something that needed to be taken care of immediately. Quirk counseling was next, and honestly Shouta berated himself for not doing that sooner, but All Might had always brushed him off when he'd brought it up. He needed to investigate Toshinori too. There's no way he wasn't tied up in this mess. Shift training was also needed, and even though he would bemoan the loss of couple hours of sleep on the weekends, he had to admit that it would be fun to show the cub the advantages of a feline soul form. This all would require the approval of the kid's mother, which was a whole other issue. He believed Midoriya that his mother didn't hurt him. The cub had seemed genuinely surprised when he asked, but there are other ways a parent could be unfit for a child. How did his mother not notice he was a shifter? Or the abuse he suffered in school? He would have to talk to Nezu about all this, as much as he hated to admit it. He was sure that the rat would have fun raking a discriminatory school over the coals, but it was a toss-up if he'd give Shouta the answer to any of his other questions. And then there was Bakugo. Sho! The distinctive avian shout of his husband knocked him out of his thoughts as a white body hurled into his chest. He took the impact with a stifled grunt and quickly caught the feathery projectile. Was that really necessary? He grumbled as he rearranged himself so his sunshine could perch on his forearm. Maybe, Zashi teased before seeing the look on his face. Whatcha thinking about, kitten? The cub and this whole situation, he sighed. Something is off about it. I don't think Midoriya really lied, but he definitely left some stuff out. I know what you mean, the cockatoo said, and he was reminded just how smart his husband was. His quirk concerns me. It's way too strong for him to also be a shifter, and his activation date is way too late for him to be a typical late bloomer. All Might knows something, I'm sure of it, he responded, and of course the rat keeps tabs on anything that goes on in his school. The question is which one is going to tell me about it. Well, as Nizu's protege he shares more with you, Zashi thought, but he can be a secretive BSTRD when he wants to be. I'd bet All Might would crumble under one of your eraser head glares, though. I do not have an eraser head glare, he muttered, massaging his temples. This whole thing was giving him a headache. Sensing his distress, his husband shuffled up to his shoulder and began to gently preen his hair. Zashi's tendency to play with his curly locks was only amplified in his soul form, and Shouta enjoyed it immensely. He sighed and leaned against a tree, reaching up to pet his sunshine with one hand. We'll get to the bottom of this, Zashi reassured, nuzzling his beak against Shouda's cheek. Now that we know more we can help the little listener better. You did good, Sho. Thanks, Birdie, he said, pressing a quick kiss to his husband's feathery head. Always, kitten, Zashi responded softly, settling closer to his neck. Just then, Midoriya bounded down the path, clumsily skidding to a stop in front of them. Shouta couldn't tell if the cub's normal lack of grace had carried over, or if it was his lack of experience on four legs, but he had to hide a small smirk in his capture weapon as Midoriya tripped over his front paws. You doing good, kiddo? Zashi asked, amusement clear in his voice, and Midoriya embarrassedly nodded. Noting the time on his phone as well as the various updates from Nemuri about his class, Shouta stood up and gestured towards the dorms. It's getting late, cub, let's head back, he said, ambling in that direction. You feel up to eating anything? Midoriya tilted his head as if thinking about it, then shrugged. Give it a shot, all right? Zashi said, looking down at the cub from his perch. It's not good to go to bed on an empty stomach, and as I've told Sho many times, jelly pouches don't count. He rolled his eyes, grinning internally at Midoriya's amused chuff. They soon made it to their dorm, avoiding any others as their apartment had its own patio entrance due to his late-night patrols. Once inside he turned to the cub. Mind if we let the cats out? He asked. They don't mind my soul form, so they should be okay with yours. Midoriya eagerly nodded, and Shouta grinned, opening their bedroom door. Immediately, a white and gray cat eagerly trotted out, followed by a black and orange one at a more sedate pace. The hyper one is Nijirai, Zashi said, gesturing animatedly with a wing, and the pompous one is Sashimi. The cub stared wide-eyed as Nijirai came right up to him and held perfectly still while she sniffed him over. Sashimi looked over at them out of one eye and continued his way towards the kitchen. Finished with her judgment, Nijirai let out a trill while rubbing her cheek against his side, then bounded over to Shouta and started meowing for food. Yes, you gremlin, I'll feed you, he said, heading towards the pantry. The teachers had moved in a few days before the students, so they had most of their necessities unpacked. As he fed their furry brats, he heard his husband telling Midoriya various funny stories about the cat's antics. He grabbed the bird food they had for Zashi, then mentally ran through what a saber-toothed tiger would eat. He wasn't usually picky in his soul form, but an extinct predator was an entirely different ballgame. "Hey cub, any of these seem appetizing?" he asked, grabbing a few options from the fridge. Zashi joined them and peered over interestedly as Midoriya sniffed the packages, then nodded at the ground beef. "Raw or cooked, listener?" Zashi asked curiously. The cub made a couple rapid-fire meows, clearly his form of muttering in his soul form, and he and his husband exchanged an amused glance. He grabbed some rice and eggs for his dinner while Zashi exchanged chirps with Midoriya before eventually settling on raw. Later, once their various meals had been eaten, his husband flapped his way over to the couch. "Wanna watch a movie?" he asked. "I've got a lot of American musicals that Sho doesn't have the taste to appreciate." Shouta snorted as he grabbed a cup of coffee and headed over to join them. "It's not logical to break out in song every 5 minutes, he fired back with his usual jab. Eventually a compromise was reached and they started The Lion King once everyone was sprawled out comfortably on the couch. Soon Shouta found himself with the cub's head on his lap, his hand running through his fur, with the love of his life belting Hakuna Matata in his ear. He smiled as Midoriya began to softly purr, almost overwhelmed by the absolute trust the cub was displaying. The day had started off pretty terribly, but at times like these, it was one of the few moments he found himself to be an optimist. After all, it was only logical that good times like these would happen again, right? Hizashi woke to the pleasant sensation of sunlight warming his cheek, and the not-so-pleasant feeling of having slept sitting up. Sometime in the middle of the night he must have shifted back, which was immediately apparent due to his blurry vision and muffled hearing. He was sprawled over a familiar black blob, his face nestled into the crook of Sho's neck. Pressing a light kiss to his husband's stubble, he gently extricated himself from the awkward position he found himself in. After stretching and feeling most of his joints crack like a glow stick, he retrieved his hearing aids and glasses from Sho's office. Now able to finally see clearly, he couldn't help the grin that spread across his face when he took in the scene in their living room. The TV was still playing Lion King, everyone having clearly fallen asleep before it was finished. This was even more evident due to the fact that Midoriya was sleeping soundly with his head resting on his kitten's lap and one of Sho's hands buried in his curls. He quickly took a picture, then headed to the kitchen to feed their cats, trying not to trip over the fluff balls when they circled his feet, and made a cup of coffee for his starlight. Setting the mug on the coffee table, he brushed a strand of hair out of Sho's face and then pressed a kiss to each of his eyelids. Sho softly grumbled before cracking open one eye, used to this wake-up ritual. "Good morning, kitten," he whispered, offering the mug to his sleepy husband. Sho eagerly accepted the beverage, and after one sip seemed to realize the current position he was in. The way he suddenly froze like a deer in headlights made Hizashi bite his lip to keep from laughing. Sho immediately noticed and shot him a glare, which was offset by his ruffled bedhead and the corners of his mouth twitching up into a smile. He looked back down at his cub, and Hizashi would for sure be teasing him about that later, and the way his eyes held such fondness for the little listener made Hizashi melt. After one last pet of the kiddo's curls, he nimbly twisted his way out from underneath the sleeping child, laying Midoriya gently back down on the couch. Hizashi quickly spread a soft blanket over the listener, then grabbed his starlight's hand to drag him into their kitchen. As he started making tea for himself, he relaxed as he felt Sho's arms wrap around him from behind and his chin rest on his shoulder. "Sleep well?" he asked, leaning into the embrace. "My back feels like sheet and I have Hakuna Matata seared into my brain," he replied, but Hizashi could hear the smile in his voice. "Remind me why I let you put on that movie?" "Because you wanted to do something nice for your cub," he teased. He could feel Sho's huff of dismissal but grinned wider when his husband didn't deny it. "Is there anything we need to do today?" he asked more seriously. His kitten sighed and poured himself another cup of coffee. "I scheduled a meeting with Nedzu for us before lunch last night. As much as I doubt that he'll give me what I want, there are some things that we'll need his approval for anyway. I also want to track down the #1 idiot before classes start tomorrow." He nodded his agreement and checked the time. They had luckily woken up early enough that there was time to make a simple breakfast before things went down. As they cooked with an ease that spoke of many years living together, Midoriya stumbled into the kitchen, yawning and rubbing his eyes. "Good morning," he cheered, internally cooing at the cute little fangs left over from Midoriya's shift. "Food will be ready in a minute, cub. Want anything to drink?" Sho asked, waving a hand dismissively when the little listener quickly protested. "You need to eat, and after the camp I have doubts that you hellions can cook anything remotely edible." Hizashi smirked at that, remembering his and Sho's equally terrible attempts during their own summer training. Later, while eating, he looked over to Midoriya. "So, little listener, do you have any preference for doing quirk training or shift training first?" he asked. Midoriya jumped a little, his wide eyes reminding Hizashi of an owlet. Probably shift first," he said, and then a little quieter, "I don't want to hurt myself beforehand." Hizashi cringed internally at that, remembering how self-destructive the kiddo's quirk could be, but smiled reassuringly. "Well, the first thing we'd be working on with your quirk is control, so there'd hopefully be no risk of that. And we can always have Mr. Anti-Quirk Man here to stop it before things get out of hand," he said, winking at his husband, who rolled his eyes in response. Midoriya giggled a bit at the nickname, but shook his head. "Maybe a little later on? But for now I think taking it safe would be better," he responded. "You got it," he said, shooting finger guns at the kiddo. "We'll start next weekend so there will be enough time between our shifts." Sho nodded his head approvingly, probably glad Midoriya was leaning away from his self-sacrificial tendencies. They soon finished their meal and sent the little listener on his way, which meant it was time to face the rat. Hizashi was, quite frankly, eager for this meeting. Critical information had been withheld for too long, and now both he and his husband were on the warpath. Nedzu had obviously picked up on their impatience and skipped through his usual pleasantries. "What can I do for you two gentlemen?" he asked, although it was more of a formality than anything else. "I would like to know why I was not informed of Midoriya's late bloomer status as his homeroom teacher." Sho stated coldly, his tone brooking no argument. "Ah yes, Midoriya-kun." Nedzu smiled sadly. "The short answer is that I was told by someone with impressive status to not say a word of it." The rat sighed and steepled his paws. "The more correct answer would be that I advocated for you to be informed, but I was assured that Midoriya-kun would be receiving all the support he needed, and I had no reason to doubt him. After recent events and some information gathering on my part, I can see that I was wrong. Forgive me for that, Shouta-kun." Sho's eyes narrowed, and Hizashi jumped in to give his husband a moment to collect himself. "You know as well as I, Nedzu-sen, that Midoriya's quirk makes no sense," he said, gauging the rat's reaction. "What are you hiding from us?" "I'm sorry to say that this I cannot tell you as much as I would like to," Nedzu said, setting down his teacup. "Something with that kind of legacy has certain legal barriers associated with it. I will not prevent you from investigating the quirk's origins, however. Even if I wasn't able to be informed of his status, why wasn't I or any of the staff notified of his past abuse? And how did his abuser manage to slip through your own screening process?" Sho said through gritted teeth. "Aldra Middle School did a remarkable job sweeping anything they viewed as harmful to their star pupil under the rug," Nedzu explained, though Hizashi could see anger glittering in his black eyes. "The principal was once a victim of abuse himself after all. And I was again told that Midoriya-kun was fine. His obvious tells made me suspicious of this story, but without any concrete proof I legally have no access to any sort of records. With Midoriya-kun's confession we can proceed with Aldra's dismantling immediately." "We are helping," Hizashi stated firmly, and Nedzu gave an accepting nod. "Several things seem to be slipping under your impressive radar these days, Nedzu-sen," Sho drawled venomously. "Midoriya will be put in therapy immediately, as well as attending private training with Hizashi and I. I want Bakugo away from Midoriya, and to be properly punished once we have evidence of his wrongdoings, preferably out of my class. Midoriya's home life also needs to be investigated as soon as possible. His mother's lack of knowledge on his condition concerns me." Nedzu met his starlight's glare evenly, but agreed easily. Sho stood and made his way to the door. With one hand on the door knob, he turned back to Nezu. These kids have been through too much to be failed by their school, is that understood, Nezu-san? He said darkly. I understand, Shouta-kun. It won't happen again, the principal said, and Hisashi could tell he was genuine. They would have to hope his promise would be enough. The both of them quickly left the rat's office, and found a corner they knew to be empty of surveillance devices. His kitten slumped against the wall and pinched the bridge of his nose. That's Hinrat, he breathed. The cub was suffering at my hand for half a year because Nezu couldn't share? When has he ever cared about legality? Hisashi gently pulled the hand-pinching show's nose away from his face with one hand and softly cupped his Starlight's cheek in the other. You can't change the past, kitten, he said, pressing their foreheads together. And you weren't the cause of his suffering. If you were, he would never have said anything. So don't blame yourself, all right? Sho closed his eyes and took a few calming breaths. When he looked back up into his eyes, Hisashi could see the anger in his pupils as he bared a feral grin. At the sight of his husband in renewed spirits, he couldn't help a matching grin of his own from spreading across his face. I have a former hero to skin. Izuku was practically humming with energy, and he couldn't keep his foot from tapping as he worked on his hero analysis for the future number 14 notebook in the common room. He couldn't remember the last time he had slept so well, free from nightmares and flares of pain shooting up his mangled arms. He wondered if the reason for his clumsiness yesterday was because he was unused to them responding as well as they did. He could feel his cheeks heat up as he thought of the reason he had slept so well. He had fallen asleep on his teacher's couch while watching Disney movies. And then they made him breakfast. None of the class would believe him if he told them about it. He quickly shoved down the thought that he couldn't remember the last time his mother had slept in even the same house as him, or the last time she had made breakfast for him. She's just busy. It takes a lot of work to care for a worthless son like me. At the same time as he was enjoying his teacher's kindness towards him, he couldn't help but feel guilty. Not only had he revealed Kachin's childish roughhousing, which wasn't even that bad, and gotten him in trouble, he had also lied to them about the quirk. Although he'd much prefer the guilt from lying by omission than betray All Might's trust. The number one hero had been the only one to make him worth something. The least he could do to repay that unimaginable kindness would be to keep the secret of one for all. He ignored the thought that Aizawa-sensei and Mike-sensei would be able to help him and were trustworthy people. They were already helping him enough with the private lessons. He wondered if he should tell All Might about that, but dismissed it. I don't want to bother him, he's been so busy after Kamino, and it's not that big a deal. I'll tell him tomorrow during school. So deep was he in his thoughts that he didn't realize when Uraraka-san, Todoroki-san, and Tsu-san had entered the common area and flinched hard when Uraraka-san bounced in front of him. Covering up his reaction with a smile and sheepish giggle, he tucked his notebook away, not noticing how Todoroki-san had caught his actions. Hey, what's up Uraraka-san? He asked. Hey Deku, she replied excitedly. He hid his instinctive flinch at the nickname, repeating to himself that it meant, you can do it. We were wondering if Todoroki-kun could make a water slide with his ice and wanted you to come with. Oh sure. It'd be nice to enjoy this summer weather while we have it, he said. I wonder if Todoroki-kun can alter the density of his ice, and how well he can sculpt it. Does the sculpting part comes from his right side's ability to produce ice, or is it his left side melting the ice to form it? Does he need to make ice then use his fire to melt it, or could he use both sides simultaneously to produce water? Are his ice and fire abilities really only restricted to one side? What happens in the middle? You are muttering, Deku-kun. Tsu-san interrupted bluntly, and Izuku blushed and flapped his hands. I'm sorry, I'll stop, he said, embarrassed. It's fine Midoriya-san, Todoroki-san stated, cutting off any further apologies. Just speak up a bit more, we can't understand you. So, you ready to go? Uraraka-san jumped in. Yeah, he replied energetically. Let me change quick. As he rushed up the stairs back to his dorm, he put all thoughts of All Might out of his mind. All Might shouldn't worry about me, it'll be fine. It didn't take long for Shoyuta to find the object of his anger. The bumbling idiot was scrambling to deal with his retirement and had many a meeting with the rat about his current predicament. As such, it was no surprise that when Shouta kicked the door open into the teacher's lounge and stalked in, followed closely by his husband, Toshinori was there. The walking skeleton had let out a startled bloody cough at the noise, and gulped when he saw both of their murderous expressions. Shouta let his satisfaction at that show in his Cheshire grin as retired pro started talking. Aizawa-kun, my kun, how are things? He asked, wiping the blood away with a handkerchief. We need to talk. Shouta growled, stalking towards him. Well, I'm really quite busy he rebuffed nervously, but his darling sunshine cut him off. That wasn't a request, Toshinori-san, he said grimly. Shouda's grin stretched unnervingly wider at the whiplash the idiot seemed to have at his birdie's serious tone. What most pros and villains already knew, but Toshinori had either ignored or was ignorant of, was what happened when Zashi dropped his cheerful, airheaded facade. He looked forward to being present when his husband unleashed his wrath. You have many things to explain yourself for. Seemingly beginning to understand the futility of his position, the skeleton followed them into a soundproofed backroom. Trying to keep a handle on his quirk, he glared as Toshinori sat down. So, All Might, he said, looming over the retired pro, tell me why you refused necessary training for Midoriya despite his late bloomer status. What? Midoriya Shonen doesn't need extra training, he blustered. At that, Zashi slammed his hand on the table. Bullshit, he said, his green eyes blazing. The kid broke every bone in his body to the point of permanent disfigurement because he was trying to make up 11 years of experience by himself. I admit that his injuries are worrisome, but he got it under control. Toshinori defended. He shouldn't have had to have those injuries in the first place. Zashi exclaimed. It is literally my job to help students like Midoriya. Now he faces being unable to use his arms because he didn't get the help he needed. Looking chastised, Toshinori bowed his head. I never meant for that to happen, and I'm sorry for that, he said, and Shouta could hear the sincerity in his tone. But he was already being trained by me and my old mentor, so further training wasn't necessary. Yes, because training with someone with no teaching license and a senile retired pro clearly worked out so well for him. Shouta said scathingly. From now on Midoriya will be training with Mike and I, and any of your training will have to be supervised and approved by one of us. But I'm his mentor. Toshinori spluttered. His mentor who let him continuously shatter his bones. His sunshine objected. You clearly can't be trusted with his safety. The skeleton looked like wanted to object, but bit his tongue and nodded reluctantly. Now, speaking of your blatant and unethical favoritism towards Midoriya, Shouta continued, how long have you known Midoriya and what is your relationship with him? And you'd better pray that this is all above board, because so help you I will throw you in Tartarus myself if you harmed a hair on his head. The retired pro blanched and rapidly shook his head, holding up his hands placatingly. No, it's nothing like that, he said frantically. You remember the slime villain? Midoriya Shonen saw my true form, but his bravery to help his friend inspired me to push past my limits. I offered to help him prepare for the entrance exam and he accepted. That's all it was. Shouta narrowed his eyes. He could feel that Toshinori was leaving some things out, but he didn't feel anything terribly off with the explanation. He sighed and ran a hand down his face. Of course you would reveal a national secret to a teenager, he groaned. But aside from reckless endangerment, you don't seem to have done anything too egregious. I'm assuming you got his mother's permission for all this. At that, Toshinori grimaced sheepishly. I didn't want to put her in danger due to being related to me, and Midoriya Shonen assured me it was all right. He said, rubbing the back of his neck. Shouta slammed his head on the table. And there goes all legality, right out the window. For F's sake, All Might. Toshinori-sen, Midoriya is a minor. Zashi said, scandalized. All important decisions, especially dealing with relationships with pro-heroes, have to legally be approved by his guardian. You need to inform his mother what has been going on immediately, apologize, and hope to Kami she doesn't sue you. Toshinori nodded so fast he looked like a bobblehead. Ignoring that for now, Shouta said, resuming his disappointed glare. Since you've known Midoriya for so long, I'm assuming you know about the abuse? Abuse? Toshinori looked shell-shocked. Midoriya Shonen was abused? Shouta sighed again. They really needed to work on Spotlight Hero's situational awareness. Yes, abuse. Midoriya flinches at loud noises, distrusts authority figures, has an extremely high pain tolerance, and is shocked at even the most basic of kindness. He exchanged a look with his husband, and at his nod, continued. He is also an unregistered shifter. I'm sure you can put the pieces together yourself. The skeleton looked devastated, and rested his head in his hands. I didn't know, he said, dejectedly. In retrospect, it seems so obvious. He was always bandaged and most of his belongings were damaged, but he just brushed it off as being clumsy. Well, you can't change the past, Zashi said, shooting a pointed look at Shouta, but we're trying to make things right. Did he mention anything about his school or home life? Anything that could point us in the right direction? Toshinori leaned back in his seat and thought. Nothing seemed odd to me about his home life, it's just him and his mom, you know, he recounted. She's a nurse and extremely busy apparently. I didn't even get a chance to see her about the dorms because she was working. Shouta and his husband exchanged a concerned glance at that. If she's really that busy, that explains why she wouldn't know about his shifting or bullying. What about school? His sunshine prompted. We have reason to believe that Bakugo bullied him. And to think I thought it was a rivalry. All Might trailed off, then shook his head. He didn't really speak much about school, which felt a bit strange to me. He loves to learn, so I would have thought he'd be excited to share what was going on, but he'd clam up or change the subject whenever I mentioned it. Shouta sighed again. Well, that confirms some of our suspicions, he said, closing his eyes and pinching the bridge of his nose, trying not to feel smug that the cub had trusted him over Toshinori. He opened his eyes and fixed the retired pro with a quirk-infused glare. Now what the hell is going on with Midoriya's quirk? As much as Shouta disliked the walking skeleton for his bumbling attitude and lack of subtlety, he had to grudgingly admit that he knew how stand strong under pressure. All of his and his husband's attempts to get him to open up about Midoriya's quirk were met with deflections and insistence that it wasn't his secret to share. Shouta had been ready to use some of his more underground methods of interrogation, but his sunshine's hand on his shoulder and the lecture he would receive from Nezu on public relations made him back down. It was infuriating how unhelpful both of their meetings had been, and it was only after a few rounds of sparring with Zashi was he able to squash his frustration down to more manageable levels. There were some upsides, however, to this time waste of a Sunday. All Might was for sure involved, but didn't seem to have intentionally harmed the cub. The former symbol had pulled some strings to keep Nezu quiet, and while that had backfired, he was glad that his mentor had advocated for his inclusion from the start. That left two sources to investigate, Aldra and Midoriya's mother. Nezu had used his influence to schedule a meeting with Aldra's principal the very next day, and Shouta would recognize the olive branch for what it was. That left him and his birdie where they were now, standing at the gates of the institution that had abused at least one of his students for years. Aldra Junior High wasn't very impressive to look at, appearing like just another public school that was underfunded and overworked. What did draw Shouta's eye as he walked through the halls, however, was the level of pride the school seemed to have for their successful alumni. Posters of kids with their school photos and accomplishments lined the corridor, and hung in a place of prominence was a face he recognized. Larger than any of the others and centered in a striking orange and black sign had Bakugo glaring at the camera, hands crackling with his distinctive explosions. Underneath the photo it said, "The star of Aldra, our future #1 hero," and went on to mention his impressive quirk, acceptance into UA, and excellent grades. Shouta had a good idea of where Bakugo's inflated ego came from. As he quickly snapped a photo, Zashi tapped his arm. "Midoriya isn't on here," he signed discreetly, and Shouta felt his face settle into a grimace. His sunshine's face held a similar expression, but he quickly pulled on his present mic grin, squeezing Shouta's shoulder for reassurance. Taking a deep breath and smoothing his face to his signature blank expression, Shouta quickened his steps to the administrative offices. It was time to get some answers. Shouta had learned to trust his instincts after over a decade in the hero business, and Aldra's principal set his teeth on edge. He introduced himself as Okada Kobayakawa and was tripping over himself to cater to the prestigious UA representatives. Shouta sat back and let his husband handle the talking. A kiss-up like him would open up more to a friendly face like the voice hero, Present Mike. We're very honored to have the two of you here today, the principal began with an easy grin. It's not very often that we get the likes of UA interested in our humble institution. What can I do to help you two gentlemen? We try and check in our little listeners' previous schools once they've gotten settled into the curriculum. His husband lied smoothly. Records are no substitute for hearing it straight from the source, you dig? Of course, Kobayakawa nodded. I assume you want to know about Bakugo? Yeah. Zashi agreed, letting the principal dig his own grave. I'm sure that as the esteemed leader of this fine school you know a lot about your former pupil. Well, he is a great student, as I'm sure you know, he said eagerly, always top of his class and a joy to have in the classroom. He was determined to be a hero, and with his great quirk we knew he'd go far. Ah yes, explosion, his husband continued, quite flashy. Did he ever have any trouble reining in its more destructive tendencies? Oh, nothing too bad, the principal dismissed. He liked to roughhouse, but what teenager doesn't? I can't tell you how many desks we've had to replace. And what about your other student? His sunshine asked. Izuku Midoriya? Immediately there was a shift in Kobayakawa's demeanor, his genial smile twisting into a derisive sneer. Ah yes, the troublemaker, he sighed and shook his head. Can I be frank with the both of you? Please do, Zashi prompted. Emboldened by his husband's apparent support, Kobayakawa pushed forward. That relic should never have made it into UA, the principal said seriously. I don't know how that delinquent managed to cheat his way in. With his record and unevolved status it shouldn't have been possible. What do you mean by that? Shouta asked, barely managing to keep his temper under control. I'm sure you've seen his file? Kobayakawa answered, apparently oblivious to his hostility. He was a nightmare to teach. Kept picking fights, cheating on tests, disrupting the class, and to top it all off he refused to admit to any of it and blamed it on our honorable students. No matter what we did he never could learn his place. At that Shouta had had enough. He let his quirk flare and loomed over the principal. Shut up, he hissed, and Kobayakawa spluttered. Not one word out of your mouth about my students has been true. Not only did you belittle and abuse a future hero with the most potential I've ever seen, you twisted a strong leader into an egotistical a-hole. You will hand over the video footage from their time here to us, unedited, and you will cooperate with Nedza shortly. Don't even try to cover anything up, it just makes him angry, his sunshine stated coolly. Thoroughly frightened by the mention of the rat, the principal meekly handed over a USB drive, but Shouta was already out the door. Zashi could handle it while Shouta kept himself from punching the quirkest BSRD. By the time they made it back to their on-campus apartment, Shouda's anger had been replaced with dread. What would they see when they watched that footage? Just how badly had the system failed the cub? Was it anything like his school experience? He was drawn out of his gloomy thoughts by his birdie taking his hand. What's bothering you, kitten? He asked, rubbing circles with his thumb on Shouda's wrist. He slumped onto their couch and sighed. I was just thinking about my own middle school, he said, absent-mindedly petting sashimi. Zashi hummed sadly in agreement, then kissed his forehead for comfort. He knew all about Shouda's experience with bullies and terrible teachers as a kid with a villain's quirk. Shouta pressed their foreheads together as thanks, snorting as he saw that, somehow, both Midoriya's and Bakugo's full files had made it to their coffee table. Normally at the start of the year teachers received a summary of their records, only including the bare essentials such as grades and medical conditions, in order to not influence the teacher's judgments, but the current investigation required greater detail. Once they had settled in with fortifying coffees and cats, Shouta pressed play. From the beginning it was clear that Midoriya had suffered, and Shouta wanted to scream at the systemic abuse the cub had dealt with. The footage unfortunately didn't have audio, but the visuals were damning enough. Kids beating him up in the halls, pushing him downstairs, destroying his property, stealing his lunch and his homework, locking him in supply closets, writing slurs on his desk, leaving spider lilies and notes in his locker or the classroom. The first time they had to watch Midoriya's face go eerily blank as he caught sight of those dim and red flowers, Zashi had squeezed his hands so hard he was sure it would bruise. And the one who was at the center of this crusade was one Bakugo Katsuki. Although he didn't seem to be a part of the suicide baiting, he clearly had no such qualms using the full force of his explosions against the cub. Every one of the bullying incidents had been marked as Midoriya's fault, and with how the teachers were acting Shouta could see why. When the bullying was done in view of them, the teachers either ignored it or berated Midoriya. When he went to the nurse to get fixed up, they turned him away. When he made a minor mistake, they punished him severely, whether that be with fists or quirks. And this was all during the first year. However, what happened next made that seem tame in comparison. It appeared to be a normal class, and from what Shouta could tell, Midoriya was muttering quietly to himself. The teacher was having none of it, and brought something over to the kid. He seemed to wrestle with Midoriya for a moment, his body blocking his actions, before stepping away. Shuta's breath caught in his throat and he quickly slammed the laptop shut before his husband could see. But one glance at his sunshine made it clear that he was too late, and Zashi already knew. Aldra Junior High had muzzled his cub. Hizashi had always loved school. Everything was new and exciting, with plenty of people to meet and things to learn. At school he could be smart and bright and loud, the very opposite of what he was forced to be at his house. He would spend as long as he could there, studying in the library or joining clubs, anything to stay away from his cage. Looking back on it, it was probably one of the reasons why he was so smart. With all the time he spent at school, he had to have picked up some things. School was his refuge, his one place to fly free and be himself. That was why he became a teacher, to help school be a safe space for kids like him. He knew not all schools were like his husband's own experience would attest to that. He had hoped that Midoriya's school experience would be more similar to his own than Shou's, but that hope was dashed the minute they stepped foot on Aldra Junior High's campus. And then he saw his sweet little owlet be muzzled at his school, and everything came crashing down. The world around him faded away, and all he could feel was the muzzle. Cold steel clamped around his face and cut painfully into his cheeks and nose. His father had been especially mad at him today because he had caught Hizashi singing along to the radio. He knew he was supposed to stay silent at home, but his favorite program was on and he had thought his parents would be gone for a little while longer. So stupid, aren't you supposed to be the smartest one around here? He thought to himself cruelly. In his fury, his father had tightened the muzzle more than usual and he could barely breathe without the sharp edges slicing into his face. He tried to keep his tears at the pain in, knowing the salt would only exacerbate his wounds. He didn't know how long it had been since his father had tossed him into basement. It was hard to tell time in the pitch-dark blackness of the small room. With the muffling of noise from being underground coupled with his already poor hearing and the lack of any ornamentation in the basement aside from the dirt floors and walls, it was almost as if he was in a sensory deprivation chamber. He struggled not to cry as he curled into a ball on the ground. It was best to try and get to sleep now before the hallucinations began, as he knew from experience, but it was never easy to get comfortable with the torture device on his face. He must have been able to fall asleep at some point because he stirred awake to a strange feeling on his cheek. He opened his eyes, confused, but still wasn't able to see anything. It almost felt like he was being tickled with a feather. But when the feeling started to move, he knew what it was. A bug, and a big one too, if the large number of what he now recognized as scurrying legs were a good indication. He knew the basement was a hiding place for a large number of insects. He could hear them scuttling on occasion, but they had never really climbed on him. He flinched and struggled not to scream at the sensation, and that was his worst mistake. Immediately there was burning pain on his already sensitive cheekbone as the insect bit down. He thrashed about, scrabbling at his face with his hands, trying to get the demon thing off of him, but it only seemed to make whatever it was angrier. It bit again and again, until it felt like his whole face was on fire. He finally was able to grab something chitinous and tossed it far away from him before it could chomp down on his fingers. He scrambled away into the opposite corner and tried to stop his stifled whimpering before his parents heard him. It wasn't easy, as his face was in more pain than it had ever been, and the burning feeling wasn't going away. Nothing he did seemed to help, and in fact it was only growing worse. With dawning horror, he realized the bites were swelling and the rapidly inflaming flesh was digging into the tightly affixed muzzle. He was starting to struggle to breathe, and clawed at his face as the agony continued to worsen. Get it off, get it off, get it off, it hurts, it hurts, I can't breathe, stop it, please, let me out, get it off. Something warm wrapped around his wrists and pulled his hands away from his face. He whimpered and thrashed. Didn't they see that he had to get it off? It hurts, it hurts, it hurts. The warmth began to press soothingly on his back and gently move up and down. He had to admit that this heat was nice. It was much more comforting than the burning of his face. Get it off, it hurts, let me out. Now that he recognized the warmth to be nice, he could feel more of it pressed against the side of his torso and leg, and it seemed to be vibrating. No, it was rumbling, with sort of a pattern, and he ped his head curiously toward it. The rumbling seemed to notice this, and pressed a little more insistently against his back, and rumbled louder. He thought maybe the rumbling was a voice, and listened harder, just barely able to make out the words. Ysf dash, zadesh, dash, air, breath mishait gria dash, you're here to me, keep breath, baby, everything is okay, ow, come back to birdie, take deep breaths dash. He recognized that voice. That was his starlight, his kitten, his husband, his show. He trusted that voice, so he did as he said, taking needy gulps of air in rhythm with the stroking of his spine. He opened his eyes, he didn't even realize they had been closed, and saw his lovely and kind husband sitting next to him. He stared deep into his dark eyes, shining with concern, and felt the last of his panicked haze get washed away by the pools of void. He slumped further into his starlight and wrapped his arms firmly around Sho's muscled torso. You back with me, sunshine? He asked gently, returning the embrace just as strongly, knowing how grounding the pressure was for him. Kami, I love him so much. Hizashi nodded against his chest, and his kitten rumbled approvingly in the way Hizashi adored and Sho insisted wasn't a purr. His starlight gently maneuvered them so they were both laying down. Hizashi held tightly onto Sho's chest and his nose tucked directly underneath his stubble. They both sank into the embrace for a few moments, letting the remaining tension drain out of them. It was no surprise that both of them quickly fell into an easy sleep. When Hizashi began to stir, it had been enough time for Nijirai to curl up on his back and Sashimi to find her perch. The pompous feline was staring down at the pair of them from her throne on the top of the couch like the queen she was. Hizashi huffed in amusement and the puff of air tickled Sho into awareness, causing him to blink slowly awake from his catnap. His gaze soon found Hizashi's and he smiled softly down at him as he gently began to run strong fingers through his golden hair. Feeling any better now, birdie? He asked, voice rough with sleep and concern. A little jittery, but I'm all right, he said quietly, then pressed a kiss to Sho's neck. Thank you for getting me out of it, kitten. Always, Sho said seriously. They basked in the silence for a bit, then his starlight continued. I think you shouldn't watch the rest of the footage. I don't want to trigger another flashback. As if sensing Hizashi about to argue, he pressed on quickly. I know you still want to help the cub, but you can do it without triggering your own trauma. We still have to correct both of their full files, and I need your help dealing with Bakugo. You know I have bias towards bullies and you've always been better with emotions. I don't want you facing your own past trauma by yourself, Hizashi refuted, although he knew Sho made good points. If you do this, you tap out if it gets bad and we both see our therapists as soon as we can. His starlight grumbled but agreed, and Hizashi had to stifle a chuckle after seeing how similar his pouting face was to the one Nijirai made when they wouldn't give her another treat. His husband made as if to move Nijirai off so they could both get up, but Hizashi pressed a long kiss to his kitten's lips before he could shift too far. Not yet, Starlight, he said softly, nuzzling into Sho's sandpaper-rough stubble. Sue him, it's been a rough day and he wants to cuddle with his husband for a little longer. Okay, sunshine, Sho agreed easily, reaching up to gently slide his cheek with a callous thumb. I love you, my birdie. I love you, my kitten. Something was going on, Izuku was sure of it. He had always prided himself on his observational skills, a trait he had honed to help him avoid bullies and analyze quickly. This had been undeniably useful at UA, even if he wasn't using it to look out for smirking grins, harmful hands, and tripping feet, and now he was using it to try and figure out what Aizawa-sensei, Mike-sensei, and All Might were up to. Both Aizawa-sensei and Mike-sensei had left school early yesterday, and he hadn't heard anything from All Might, which was strange. Today both Aizawa-sensei and Mike-sensei had been shooting him looks all class, and now Aizawa-sensei wanted to talk with him. He tried to ignore the tangled ball of nerves that had settled in his stomach as he trailed after his sensei towards the teacher's lounge. He couldn't think of anything that had happened between their last roller coaster of a meeting and today that would warrant a talk, but then again he hadn't expected that first meeting with Aizawa-sensei either. Did I do something wrong? Were they not supposed to make a water slide? Did they change their mind about me? Am I being expelled? However, he wasn't given much time to stew in his negative thoughts as Aizawa-sensei quickly shuffled them into his office. It was remarkably similar to his one at the dorms, with a solid wood desk facing a comfortable sofa, bookshelves lining the walls, and a large window looking out over the immaculate UA grounds. Mike-sensei was also there, leaning on the desk and checking his phone. He looked up when the door opened and gave them both a bright smile and wave. "Hey little listener," he greeted, and Izuku shyly returned the wave before sitting on the sofa. Aizawa-sensei settled himself beside his husband before sighing. Why did you need to see me, senseis?" Izuku asked, fidgeting nervously. "You're not in trouble, cub," Aizawa-sensei said, and the sincerity in his voice, coupled with the use of the cute nickname, made Izuku relax slightly. "But there are some things that you need to be made aware of." Izuku tilted his head questioningly at that. Just what had happened in these last 2 days? "We went to check out your middle school, kiddo," Mike-sensei said gently, and Izuku startled. "They did that already. And what we found was very concerning. Detective Tsukachi is investigating them as we speak, and we expect arrests to be made and that institution shut down by the end of the week." Izuku stared at the pair of them, mouth agape. "What? They're shutting down Aldera? Because of me? I'm such a bother, it wasn't even that bad." "I'm going to stop you right there, Midoriya," Aizawa-sensei said, and Izuku flushed when he realized he was muttering. "You are not a bother or a burden. What they did to you was terrible as well as illegal, and it was their fault, not yours. They needed to be stopped before they could hurt anyone else. Another quirkless kid was going to go to Aldera. Would you want things to be the same as it was for you?" Izuku shook his head mutely. He didn't want anyone else to experience the hell that was Aldera. He deserved it and could take whatever they threw at him, but others didn't. Then his heart dropped into his shoes. If they knew everything about Aldera, then that meant they also knew everything about. "We also saw what Bakugo did to you, listener," Mike-sensei said, moving to crouch in front of him, and Izuku gulped. His actions should have barred him from UA, but as it stands, he did make it in. That doesn't mean he won't be punished though. However, before anything is finalized, is there anything that you know about Bakugo that we should take into account? Izuku bit his lip and twisted his fingers nervously, unsure of what to say. Could he do anything to convince them that it wasn't a big deal? "We were friends once," he began shakily. "Keikachin was always so cool. And then his quirk came in, and it was so amazing, and mine didn't, and everyone started to treat us differently. Keikachin could do no wrong, and I could never do anything right. And all of that went to his head. He's not needlessly cruel. Auntie Mitsuki is just brash and loud and physical, and Keikachin takes after her. Kachin is going to be great. I'm not worth taking away his dream." He looked up at both of the pros imploringly, hoping they heard his sincerity. Mike-sensei looked over his shoulder to share a look with his husband, and Aizawa-sensei sighed in response. "Midoriya, you have worth too," Aizawa-sensei said gently. "Bakugo is not more worthy than you." Izuku looked away, wanting to disagree but knowing his senseis wouldn't like that. "Thank you for telling us, kiddo," Mike-sensei said, picking up where his husband left off. "That gives us a better idea of what to do. Firstly, effective immediately, Bakugo is expelled from the hero course. But Keikachin's gonna be a hero," Izuku protested, tears starting to flow down his cheeks. Slowly, Mike-sensei reached out and took Izuku's hands in his, while Aizawa-sensei moved to crouch down beside the two of them. Not as he is now, cub, Aizawa-sensei said gently, shaking his head. He has potential, I'll admit, but he is too prone to violence and lacking in empathy. That doesn't mean he can't change, however, so he will be staying at UA, just in 1C. The environment the two of you grew up in, especially that pathetic excuse of a school, did both of you no favors. Hopefully now that he's in a better environment his behavior will improve. As part of this he will also be attending mandatory therapy and anger management, performing community service, and wearing quirk suppressants until it is clear that he won't attack others unprovoked. He will also not be able to interact with you, unless it is scheduled ahead of time, both of you consent, and a teacher, likely Mike or myself, is in attendance. If his therapist and homeroom teacher see improvements, and he does well in the third-year sports festival, there is a chance he could transfer back into the hero course. Izuku was well and truly crying now. Kacchan wouldn't be a hero and it is all my fault. I'm such a worthless relic of a Deku, I mess everything up. Hey, none of that now, Mike-sensei soothed, rubbing circles on Izuku's scarred hands with his thumbs as Aizawa-sensei squeezed his shoulder in support. Bakugo is responsible for his own actions. You did nothing wrong, so don't beat yourself up about it, you dig? Do you want a hug? Izuku nodded shakily and tilted into Mike-sensei's open arms. He pressed his face into his sensei's leather jacket, leaning into the embrace. He started to cry even harder when a second pair of arms encircled him from behind as Aizawa-sensei joined in on the hug. It was easy to calm down when he was surrounded by such warmth and care, something that he hadn't really experienced since that fateful diagnosis. Once his tears had mostly run dry, he pulled away from the hug. Both his senseis settled beside him. You feeling better, cub? Aizawa-sensei asked, still rubbing a hand along Izuku's back. Izuku nodded as he tried not to lean into the touch too much, but based on how the corner of his sensei's mouth was twitching he wasn't doing a very good job. That's good. We also think therapy would be helpful for you after everything. Izuku hunched into himself at that, but Aizawa noticed his distress quickly and reassured him. It's not a punishment, nor are we trying to fix you. Most pros go to therapy for one reason or another, me and Mike included. You'd be seeing Hound Dog, someone we both know and trust, Mike-sensei added, and if you go to a couple sessions and you don't like it for any reason we can try someone else or you can stop. Does that sound fair to you? Izuku thought about it, but nodded hesitantly. If both of his senseis did it, then why shouldn't he? Both Mike-sensei and Aizawa-sensei smiled proudly at him in response, and he turned red with embarrassment. I'm glad you agree, kiddo, Aizawa-sensei said, continuing his soothing ministrations. Now this is a lot of big changes, so we'll need to meet with your mother. When is she free? Izuku felt like his heart was about to hit the floor. Out of all the terrible meetings he had had lately, Shouta thought this upcoming one would be the worst. With the target of the meeting being the walking bombshell that was Bakugo Katsuki and his equally explosive mother in attendance, Shouta was sure he was going to have a migraine by the end of it. Bakugo would likely not take any accusations lying down, and depending on how his parents reacted the meeting could go from bad to worse in an instant. At least he had his emotional support husband with. Logistically it made sense for Bakugo to be placed into his 1C homeroom, as he would be taking the place of his replacement. As they walked through the halls towards Nedzu's office, he looked over to his sunshine, who was nibbling on his lip in worry. He frowned at the display, not wanting his husband to hurt himself, and tapped his hand as reminder. Zashi flashed a small smile at him for that, and stopped his gnawing, but looked like he was having trouble not fidgeting. Shouta wished they were in a more secluded area so he could comfort his birdie properly, but he settled for asking what was going on. What are you worried about, Zashi? He sighed. His husband sighed, before replying quickly. It's Midoriya. His response to being asked about his mom was concerning. Shouta nodded in agreement. It was true, when they asked how they could meet with his mom the cub had stuttered profusely before admitting that his mom was very busy and he didn't know when she would be free. He also asked if it was really necessary for them to meet with her, as he didn't want to bother her. It was another piece of evidence for something going on with Midoriya's home life. As soon as this whole debacle with Bakugo was over, that would be the next problem he would address. While it was clear that But Might was involved in the secret of the cub's quirk, it was equally clear that he wouldn't say anything on the matter. That meant that the truth of whatever was going with the quirk would have to be told to him by Midoriya, which would take time and trust. So that left the cub's mother for issues that he could deal with himself. As soon as the transfers are all through, we'll investigate his home life. He signed, trying to be reassuring. With the dorms we can afford to be patient, nothing related to his mom can reach him there. We'll figure it out, sunshine. Zashi didn't look entirely pleased with that, but acquiesced, knowing the truth in the statement. With that they had reached the rat's imposing office door, and his birdie straightened into his present-mic demeanor before striding in as the door opened ahead of them. The Bakugo family was already there, sitting on the couch facing the principal. Shouta chose to stand against the side wall in order to get a good view of all the participants, and Zashi elected to follow him. At their entrance, the rat wrapped up the pleasantries and steepled his paws in front of him on the desk. Now that all parties are present, I believe we can begin. I'm sure you all have questions as to the purpose of this meeting, the principal stated. Yeah, the brat's never had any problems in school, Bakugo Mitsuki said. He's not having any trouble with his grades, is he? Of course not, you old hag. I'm the best. Bakugo exploded, and Shouta nearly had to flash his quirk for Bakugo to get himself under control. At that display, Bakugo-san looked to be gearing herself up for an argument, but Bakugo Masaru cut in. Katsuki, please be respectful, he said, and the kid reined himself in a bit, looking sad the entire time. But yes, we are curious as to the reason for this meeting? Netsu nodded. I'll get straight to the point, the rat replied. Aizawa-sensei here was recently made aware of some concerns in regards to your son's behavior, and after an investigation into Aldra Middle as well as comparisons to his time here at UA, it was determined that Bakugo Katsuki physically bullied, mentally abused, and suicide-baited Midoriya Izuku while at Aldra, and has continued this pattern of behavior while at UA. For a moment, it was as if the whole world had slowed to a stop, and Shouta braced himself. In a moment the peace was shattered as Bakugo-san erupted. What? That's a lie, Katsuki-kun isn't a bully, she said, standing angrily, and especially not towards dear Izuku-kun. He and Katsuki have been best friends since diapers, just like Inko-chan and I. He's like a nephew to me. Well, that was an interesting development, Shouta thought, exchanging a glance with his husband. He knew that there was a complicated relationship between the cub and Bakugo, but to think he knew his abuser for that long, and the family was still convinced they were friends? This whole thing got more troublesome. In contrast to his mother's outburst, Bakugo had paled in stony silence, but the white was quickly being replaced by the red of rage. Sensing this, Netsu continued. I'm sure this must be shocking to hear, but we have proof. Here are some videos obtained from Aldra Middle and our own records detailing this behavior. The rat said, gesturing to a screen which switched on to reveal Midoriya's terrible experience. Any protests the elder Bakugas had were quashed in the face of the evidence of Bakugo physically assaulting Midoriya with and without his quirk, lashing out with devastating words, his actions at the battle trial and the final exam, and finally, his suicide baiting of Midoriya. When the videos ceased, the mother had been reduced to a shocked silence, while the father turned to address his son. Katsuki, how could you? Izuku-kun was your friend, he said, saddened. The quirkless Deku was always looking down on me. Bakugo exploded. That relic needed to be taught his place. Bakugo Katsuki, sit down, his father said. At the man's uncharacteristically stern words, the kid sat down quickly, seemingly shocked to be put into his place. Once he had confirmed that his kid wasn't in danger of blowing up again, Bakugo-san sunk into a low bow, putting a hand on both his wife and his son's backs to coax them into doing the same. We are truly sorry for our son's actions. Forgive us for not recognizing and correcting his behavior sooner. What steps will be taken moving forward? Please, rise, Netsu said, seeming pleased. With the apology. As soon as he was allowed to straighten back up, Bakugo wrenched himself free of his father's hand. If his behavior had been properly recorded, Bakugo-kun would never have been accepted into UA and he would be facing juvenile detention for assault with a deadly weapon. Netsu continued. The mother seemed to choke on nothing with those words, and even the younger Bakugu looked shaken. Shouta had to refrain from letting his enjoyment show on his face. It seemed Netsu was showing his sadistic side today. But due to Aldra Middle's illegal tampering, he was allowed in. Thus, it falls to us to decide his punishment. Due to your actions, Bakugu Katsuki, you are henceforth expelled from the hero course. What? The response was immediate, Bakugu leaping to his feet with crackling explosions in both palms. Shouta quickly stepped forward and flashed his quirk, letting his capture scarf rise and his eyes flare in an intimidating display. Sit down, he growled. You have no right to complain. You are very lucky I didn't expel you entirely. Think about what you're doing before you give me an excuse to kick you out for real. Cowed, Bakugu slunk back into his seat, and Netsu resumed as if nothing had happened. Bakugu-kun will be placed in 1C, under present mic. As part of his continued enrollment, he will be required to attend mandatory therapy and anger management, perform community service, and wear quirk suppressants until he has proved he will not use his quirk to harm others. He will also not be able to interact with Midoriya unless it is scheduled ahead of time, both parties involved consent, and a teacher is in attendance to supervise. Netsu took a sip of his tea before continuing. However, most of these actions had occurred before his time at UA, and during his time here we have observed some improvement in his behavior. We know that there is always a possibility for growth in our students. If both his therapist and homeroom teacher see improvements, and he does well in the third-year sports festival, there is a chance he could transfer back into the hero course at that time, but he would be placed in 1B. Any questions? The Bakugus sat in shock, before Bakugu-san bowed again, forcing her son down with her. Thank you for your generosity. We failed as parents to let it get this far. Katsuki-kun won't make you regret giving him this chance, she said, steel in her voice. Netsu nodded, before clapping his paws together. I'm glad we all understand each other. Now, let's talk about Bakugu-kun's transfer into 1C. His husband pushed off the wall to engage in the conversation, and Shouta made his exit. His sunshine knew what to do. Hizashi thought that he was the most excited he had ever been for a weekend. After a week of tough meetings, discoveries, and consequences, it was finally time for the owlet's shift training. Not only would he get to help his favorite little listener shift, he would also be able to enjoy his husband's adorable soul form. Not even his worry about the upcoming meeting with Midoriya's mother or the work he would have to do for all the transfers next week could dampen his upbeat mood. He was practically skipping his way to the training gym, with Sho ambling lazily alongside him, mouth quirked up in fond exasperation at his antics. They didn't have to wait long for the owlet to meet them, who was vibrating in place with equal parts enthusiasm and nerves. His kitten waved the pair of them into Gym Theta, a simpler training space with a large open area and training mats, typically used for practicing quirkless combat. Coupled with its high ceiling, sturdy rafters, and distance from the main campus, it was his Starlight's favorite space, and most of the teachers regarded it as Eraserhead's gym. They sat cross-legged in the center, and Hizashi took the lead, clapping his hands together. Alright, so the main things to work on in regards to your shift is how to shift with intention, he began, Sho, nodding along. I'm guessing you worked hard on suppressing any chance of shifting to avoid being found out, right? Midoriya nodded in agreement. While you seem to have a pretty good handle on not shifting, suppressing a shift for too long is detrimental. It's like denying a part of yourself, which isn't healthy. It also causes people to lose control of their shifts in high-stress situations, which you experienced last week. You shifted without meaning to, and then once you were in your soul form you had trouble shifting back. So we're going to practice getting in and out of your soul form on your own terms, yet a dig. At that waterfall of information the owlet looked a bit overwhelmed, but still eager to try. The kiddo is all about that plus ultra, isn't he? How do I shift when I want to? The little listener asked. I don't think I've ever really done it on purpose. Hizashi shared a sad look with his Starlight at that. There's a couple different methods, and we can try them all to see what's best for you, his husband responded, but the most common one is visualization. You remember what it felt like to be in your soul form, and then try to grasp that feeling once again. If things are going well, you'll start to experience some pain as you shift, and when that happens, push through it. Having the drive to shift will make it shorter and the pain more bearable. Most shifts fail because even if they have good visualization, the pain starts and they stop remembering the feeling and no longer have the drive. Since I also have a feline form, I can talk you through what I think about if you want. Midoriya agreed immediately, and Hisashi was full of admiration and love for his husband at showing such a vulnerable part of himself. He really had come so far with opening up after Oboro's death, and it was beautiful too. So, if you're ready to try, close your eyes and relax, his kitten said, and the little listener followed his instructions quickly. Breathe deeply and calm yourself. Remember what it was like to be in your soul form. Remember how it felt to be on 4 legs. Remember the feeling of wind in your fur. Remember how sharp your eyesight was, and how clear your hearing was. Remember all the new smells you could sense, and how powerful you felt running through the trees. Remember all of it, and have the drive to experience it all again. Hisashi watched silently, hoping for the owlet's sake it would go well. For a long moment, it seemed like nothing would happen, and Hisashi held his breath. Then an expression of serenity crossed over the kiddo's face, and a moment later, he shifted. Sure, it was long and a little awkward, but Hisashi felt nothing but pride for the little listener, and with his smile peeking out of his capture scarf, he could tell his husband felt the same way. Quickly he and Sho shifted so they could understand the kiddo, and when all was said and done it was no surprise the kid was muttering about what had happened. He nuzzled close his husband, who flopped down and curled around his smaller form before settling in to enjoy the show. So it's all about the drive and the visualization? It makes sense that it's sort of an internal process. They are called soul forms, after all, and actually it's very similar to using the quirk. If quirks and forms use the same processes, it makes sense that as quirks grew stronger there was less power or bandwidth to devote to shifting, so only those with weaker quirks would have enough of that capacity to shift. I wonder if trauma is even necessary, or if it's only the danger of the situation that forces a person to look beyond the immediate reaction of using a quirk for another solution. If that's the case, then dash. Very interesting points there, Midoriya. Hisashi exclaimed, gently interjecting. While he did want to encourage the little listener's analysis, they were in the middle of a lesson. And great job with the shift. Very few get it on their first try. The owlet spluttered, and Hisashi was sure that in human form the little listener would be blushing furiously. Aizawa-sensei helped a lot. I couldn't have done it otherwise, he protested. Don't sell yourself short, cub. I may have provided some direction, but the rest was all you, his starlight said, trying to bolster Midoriya's self-confidence. Now, do you think you have a good idea of how to go about shifting into your form for when we practice next time, or do you want to learn about a different method? Usually visualization and metaphors help me the best, the kiddo responded after a moment of thought. It's how I was able to get more control over my quirk. I think I could do the same thing next time. Alright, if you've got an idea that works, we'll roll with it, yo. Hisashi said, but it's no biggie if we have to try something else next time, okay? I tried a lot of methods before settling on one that was best for me. For going back to your human form, it's a very similar process, just with visualizing human traits. I find it helpful to think about being on 2 feet, his kitten explained. I think about having fingers and ears, Hisashi offered, before moving on. Unfortunately, the one thing about shifting is that you have to go so long between shifts, so it's hard to practice shifting in and out. However, what we can do is get you more familiar with your soul form, so you have more memories to work with for your visualization. Make sense, little listener? The owlet nodded, and Sho stood up, towering over Hisashi while nestling his form between his large front paws. We'll start simple, just with a couple laps around the gym, he began, slipping into his teacher mode. I noticed you were a bit clumsy while running, so we'll work on that today. Try and figure out what speeds and what gaits are most comfortable for you. Once you start moving it'll likely be pretty instinctual, so just go with the flow. I have 4, a slow one used for stealth and tracking, a casual walk, a faster trot, and then a full run. Go easy on yourself though, this is about finding a baseline, not pushing your limits. You're lucky you don't have to learn how to fly, kiddo. Hizashi joked, I don't think Sho has forgiven me for the time I launched myself off the counter. Midoriya giggled at that, and his husband grumbled something about hard floors and how was he supposed to know you'd be okay. With that, the two felines walked to the end of the gym to begin practicing, Hizashi flitting after the pair. He couldn't wait to snuggle with his big furry kitten later. Slowly but surely Izuku thought he was getting the hang of his soul form. It amazed him at just how right it felt to be a saber-toothed tiger. Every time he had shifted before this, which admittedly wasn't a large number of occurrences, he hadn't stayed in this form long enough to appreciate it, or there were more pressing matters on his mind. Now, though, Aizawa-sensei and Mike-sensei had set up this session for the express purpose of being comfortable in his abilities, and it was working. He loved his heightened senses, and how he could keep an eye on everything around him. He was fascinated about all of the new sensations that came with being a prehistoric predator. He was dying to investigate everything about his form as soon as possible. Unlike most shifters, he couldn't do a lot of research on his soul form as it had gone extinct before any real studies had been made. There had been a lot of theories and speculation, of course, and he was interested to see which predictions came true. I wonder which species of saber-tooth I am. Would an X-ray confirm it? But I couldn't get an X-ray without exposing myself, and I don't want to bother anyone. Plus, having a rare form is dangerous, and with the league out there I don't need more reasons for Shigaraki to come after me. I could wait until I'm fully grown and then guess based on size, but who knows how long that will be. Realizing these hypotheticals would get him nowhere, Izuku concentrated once again on being present in his new form. As he did casual laps around the gym, he was also able to observe how his teachers acted in their soul forms. It really was remarkable just how well the cockatoo and panther fit both Mike-sensei and Aizawa-sensei respectively. Now that he knew that they were both shifters, it was hard to think of any other animal that his senseis could be. The graceful strength and serious nature of the panther was perfect for the infamous underground hero, and the boisterous and cheerful voice coupled with the keen intelligence of the cockatoo fit equally well for the radio host. I wonder if Present Mike ever made mention of his soul form on his show. He definitely wouldn't go out and say it directly, but he may have referenced it at some point. I'll have to check my notebooks and go over the radio archives. I know he's done several segments on shifter awareness and combating discrimination and disinformation. Those would be good places to start. Izuku shook himself out of his thoughts before he could get caught up in a mutter stream and turned his attention back towards his teachers. From the way they interacted in their soul forms, it was clear that they spent a long time together and cared for each other a great deal. He could tell that Aizawa-sensei was always careful to be gentle when interacting with Mike-sensei, as his large form could easily do terrible damage to the smaller bird. Izuku knew his own form wasn't small by any stretch, and yet the panther was still a good deal larger than him. He also noticed that Aizawa-sensei was a lot more expressive in this form, especially with his tail, which probably moved instinctually. Izuku almost tripped over nothing as he saw the panther give a lick to the cockatoo's head. Something had startled Mike-sensei and his crest was in disarray. It seemed like Aizawa-sensei was trying to soothe the bird by grooming him. He couldn't believe that the strict teacher was showing affection so easily with a student nearby. It was probably because Mike-sensei was his husband and he didn't like seeing him distressed. He ignored the thought that Aizawa-sensei was comfortable with Izuku being around and was more freely expressing his emotions because of it. There was no reason that the stoic eraser head had to enjoy his company. He was just doing his job. But he calls you cub, and he's comforted you even when you were being a crybaby, and he did something about Kacchin for you even though you didn't deserve it? Izuku sped up unconsciously, as if he was trying to get away from the traitorous thoughts. It's not true, that's not being logical, he's just being a hero, there's no way he likes me. That last upsetting line of thinking was the straw that broke the camel's back. The distraction was enough for Izuku to stop paying attention to the movement of his paws, and he stiffened up, preparing for pain in his arms that wasn't present. The disconnect caused him to stumble, and with the speed he was going at it quickly turned into a faceplant as he skidded across the gym mats. Izuku groaned as he struggled to standing. Thankfully the cushioning on the floor prevented him from being too seriously hurt, but his teeth were sore. He sat on his haunches and pawed at one of his signature canines, but luckily they didn't seem to be damaged. Note to self, be careful of the teeth. They must have a lot of connecting nerves, so they're pretty sensitive. I'd hate to break one of them due to my own stupidity. Listener, you alright? Mike-sensei called concernedly, winging his way over to him, with Aizawa-sensei loping alongside him. I am okay, senseis, Izuku said, embarrassed at his clumsiness. IJ just tripped. It seemed like a pretty nasty fall, Aizawa-sensei said, padding closer to investigate. Satisfied with his assessment, he stepped back and sat down as well. But luckily you weren't hurt. You were doing good for a while, then you sped up and this happened. Do you have any idea why you fell? Izuku thought fast. There was no way he could tell them that he had gotten distracted wishing his teachers liked him. But both of them would realize if he wasn't telling the truth. He was a terrible liar, and he was sure to be even worse in his unfamiliar soul form. And not use tea to my arms not hurting, he spoke quickly, offering up a piece of what happened. And I forgot if that I was in an my soul F form, and tried tea to prepare myself for P pain, B but then there W wasn't any P pain, and I G got confused and T tripped myself up? At the mention of his damaged arms, Izuku could have sworn he saw a flash of concern and rage in both of his sensei's eyes. But then they turned to share a look with each other, and he couldn't tell what they were thinking anymore. I can understand trying to prepare for injuries that aren't there, Mike-sensei said gently, ping his feathered head to look at him. I sometimes get startled with how good my hearing is, you dig? But you gotta remember that this is a new and separate form, and so your normal sense of your body and how your body reacts doesn't apply. As you spend more time in your soul form and become more familiar with it, you'll get a sense for how this form moves and reacts, and soon you won't fall back on habits for your human body. The only way to form new habits is just time and patience, which is what these sessions are for, Aizawa-sensei added. Don't get discouraged. Everyone struggles to adapt to their soul form at first. With that in mind, let's do a couple of slow laps together before we call it quits. Izuku trotted after Aizawa-sensei, and they spent the next few laps around the gym in companionable silence. With the panther padding alongside him, it was easier to remember that he wasn't in his human body, and they finished the rest of the rounds without issue. As the session drew to a close, they returned to the center of the gym and sat as they had when they began earlier. So, shifting back is similar to what you did when you shifted into your soul form. You want to concentrate on visualizing what it feels like to be in your human body, yo. Mike-sensei said enthusiastically. The tricky part of shifting back isn't the visualization this time though, Aizawa-sensei continued. You already have plenty of experience being in your human body. However, it's often more difficult to find the drive to return to that body, especially if your human body is injured or in danger. So be sure to concentrate on the shift, and don't lose that drive when you feel pain. Izuku nodded in agreement and closed his eyes, concentrating on how it felt to be human. He really wanted this session to go well, especially after both his teachers took time out of their weekend to help him. He thought about having fingers and toes, and how it felt to be on two legs. He could tell he was close, but he didn't feel that familiar pain of the shift. He racked his brain trying to think of something that was quintessential for himself as a human before he hit on it. If the pain of his arms as a human was enough to distract him in his soul form, it was surely enough to anchor him to shift back. He focused on how the pain in his arm felt, on the ropey scars that carved across his arms and hands, and his crooked fingers that shook and ached on bad days. That was apparently enough to trigger the shift, and he felt pain rising up from within him. Izuku was no stranger to pain though, and after a few uncomfortable moments he opened his eyes to find himself human once again. Nice job, Owlet. Mike-sensei cawed, still in his cockatoo form, and Aizawa-sensei chuffed in agreement. We'll let you get back to the dorms. Aizawa and I are gonna patrol later. Come back here tomorrow for quirk training, yeah. Thank you, senseis. Izuku said, nodding his head vigorously before making for the exit. He wanted to get out of there quickly before he could get distracted by their kindness again. They already had done so much for him, they didn't him making it more weird. It was better for him to keep his distance so he didn't foolishly get his hopes up. One of Shouta's least favorite parts of being a teacher would be dealing with his students' parents. Unfortunately, with his propensity for expelling students, He had to deal with them quite often. Nothing got on his nerves more than oblivious parents arguing against his decisions because, "Our poor babies are nothing like that, I won't stand for it, this isn't fair," and so on and so forth. Thus it was quite odd that he hadn't seen hide nor hair of the cub's mother over halfway through the school year. He regretted not meeting with Midoriya Izuku when they were asking permission for the dorms. He thought that allowing for All Might No Brains to go in his stead was the right idea at the time, as they were making a big request from the parents, and he assumed the former hero's obvious familiarity with the cub would be a better starting point than a stranger like himself. Of course, now that he knew that But Might hadn't asked permission from the cub's mother, he could see that it had been a flawed plan from the start, not in the least because the idiot disguised as a retired pro had brushed aside Midoriya Izuku's absence so easily. This latest non-appearance was just one of the many concerns he had regarding the cub's home life, and he cursed his former ignorance for not addressing it sooner. Well, at least now he was finally getting to the root of the problem and going to meet the cub's mother with his husband by his side. Nezu had used his rat god powers and found out Midoriya Izuku's day off from her nursing job at a local hospital. They were hoping to surprise her at home so that she wouldn't have the time to hide any evidence. This brought Shouta to his current dilemma, how they were going to approach this. As an underground hero, Shouta was no stranger to the subtle approach, and it was often his most employed tactic. He had to admit that social subterfuge was not really in his wheelhouse, even though he had been trained by Nezu. However, he couldn't deny that even the mere possibility of the cub living in an unsafe home made his blood boil and encouraged him to confront Midoriya Izuku outright, even if it was reckless. In the end, he decided to defer to the expert, Hizashi. "What's our play for the cub's mother?" Shouta asked from the passenger seat of their car while turning down the radio. Out of the two of them, his sunshine was the one less likely to fall asleep at the wheel, so Zashi usually drove. His birdie hummed for a moment and drummed his fingers against the wheel. "Unfortunately, we don't have any concrete evidence of wrongdoing," his husband answered thoughtfully. Shouta grumbled but agreed. "That limits our legal options. Frankly, our best bet is saying we're following up on the missed meeting about the dorms and wanted to talk about how the listener is doing. Do you want to take point?" Shouta said, inwardly hoping for agreement. Zashi laughed. "Nice try, Starlight," his sunshine grinned. "You can't get out of social interaction that easily. As the kiddo's homeroom teacher, you'll need to lead." Shouta groaned, but deferred to his birdie's assessment. They parked close by and headed to the address they had on file for the cub. The apartment complex wasn't in the best part of town, which made sense for a single-parent household, but was relatively clean and mostly well taken care of, which allayed some of Shuta's fears. They climbed the stairs and noted the relative lack of neighbors out and about before Shouta knocked on the door with the matching apartment number. They waited for an answer, but none came. Shouta frowned and exchanged a glance with his husband. He knocked again, louder. "Midoriya-san? Are you in?" Hizashi called. Silence. "She could be out or sleeping," Shouta suggested. "Nezu confirms she left her work shift as normal last night," Hizashi said after tapping a few things on his phone. Just as Shouta was knocking again, a voice called to them from down the hall. "Are you looking for Inko-san?" It was an older lady with faded blue skin who had just exited the elevator and was looking suspiciously at them. Hizashi stepped forward and took charge of the situation. "Yes, ma'am, we're her son's teachers and we had a parent meeting scheduled today," his husband explained with a kind smile. At his sunshine's words, the neighbor relaxed. "Oh, that boy was always up to something," she said. "Inko-san is such a strong woman for dealing with that all the time." "Do you know where she might be?" Hizashi asked, not changing from his friendly demeanor, but Shouta could recognize the slight strain in his voice. "I haven't seen her around here for a while," she said thoughtfully, "probably too busy working, the poor dear. I've seen the delinquent more recently. What did he do this time?" "Unfortunately, I can't say anything," Hizashi said, sounding regretful. "Thank you for being so forthcoming, we have our hands full with this one. We'll find another time to speak with Midoriya-san." His husband exchanged a few more parting platitudes with the lady until she made her way into her own apartment. "Cover me, I'm picking the lock," Shouta signed. Hizashi rolled his eyes but turned around and made as if he was checking out his phone but positioned his body so that onlookers wouldn't see what Shouta was doing. He made quick work of it, and soon the pair of them were inside the Midoriya's apartment. The first thing that struck them about the place was the musty smell of disuse. The air was stale, as if no one had been there for a long time. Any hopes Shouta had of the cub having a normal home life were quickly fading. The second thing that they noticed was how bare the place seemed. There were no pictures on the wall, and only one pair of slippers waiting in the entryway. The pair of them silently moved in and closed and locked the door behind them, then split up in their familiar search pattern. Shouta made his way to the kitchen first. The pantry and cupboards contained only the bare essentials, and so did the fridge. He passed Hizashi coming out of the living room as he went further into the apartment. "Find anything?" Shouta signed. Hizashi shook his head. "Whole lotta nothing, neither positive or negative," his sunshine responded. "If Midoriya Izuku lives here, she must not have any personal belongings." His birdie then went past him into a room marked with a faded All Might nameplate. He let his husband investigate the cub's room and opened the next door. It revealed a bathroom with fixtures that were a little outdated, but it was clean and well kept. Further investigation turned up shampoo for curly hair and other typical toiletries, along with a large and well-stocked first aid kit. He could tell from the brands that several things like the bandages, burn creams, and painkillers had been replaced from what came with the kit. Shouta shook his head. It was further evidence that the cub had been injured and had treated his own wounds. He saw that there was a suture set included in the kit and hoped that the cub hadn't needed to use it. He left the bathroom, and after a closet that contained a washer and dryer, there was one room left to check out. His husband joined him just as he tried the door, and was surprised to find it locked. Hizashi and him exchanged a look. "Why would you lock a door in your own apartment?" Shouta pulled out his lockpicks, and this lock was as easy to open as the one on the front door. As the door swung open, Shouta grimaced, and he heard his husband curse under his breath. The room would have been the master bedroom, and was completely empty save a bed frame and a chest of drawers. There was a clear layer of dust on everything, and as his sunshine went to go check the closet, Shouta was sure he wouldn't find anything. There was a buzz in his pocket, and he checked his phone to find a text from Nezu. It just confirmed what they already knew. Midoriya Izuku hadn't lived with her son for a long time. Hizashi was fuming, and it was a terrible thing to behold. Terrible, yes, but also hauntingly beautiful, so beautiful that it was horrible to look at. There are warnings about the danger of a quiet man's anger. There are no warnings about a happy man's anger, because when a happy man is angry, a man who works 3 stressful jobs and still has time to be kind, to be nice, to cheer others up, a man who finds his own joy, when that man is angry, no one is left to tell others that which they have seen. Well, except Shouta, who Hizashi loved very much and who was smart enough to never, ever make Hizashi angry. Hizashi was rarely mad, but now Izuku Midoriya had made him angry, and he was going to bring the full force of his rage down on her. It was true Hizashi had never been abandoned like Izuku had. Hizashi's parents were always a persistently horrible part of his life, but he knew what the absence of a good parent felt like. Because he knew what it was like to have parents who were not really parents at all. Parents that hurt you, with fists or with words, parents who didn't love you and maybe never had, parents that only ever focused on what you did wrong and never what you had done right. Parents that he hoped Izuku, their cub, his owlet, didn't have. But staring in that empty, dust-covered room that should have had evidence of how Midoriya Izuku had cared for her soon, his hopes were dashed, and in their absence came the rage. The husband noticed Hizashi's anger immediately. Of course he did, Hizashi stalking towards the door with the intent of melting Midoriya Izuku with his screams wasn't exactly subtle. Shouta quickly grabbed Hizashi by the arm, and turned him so they were facing each other. "Hizashi, stop," Shouta urged sternly. Hizashi tried to twist out of Shou's grip, but it was too tight. "She abandoned him," Hizashi hissed angrily. "She just left him by himself and you want me to stop? Why aren't you mad about this?" "I am," Shouta said, and now Hizashi could that was true. His Starlight's eyes had a ring of red around the irises and the ends of his hair were starting to float up, and his dark pupils shone with fury. But getting angry won't help the cub. Think, sunshine, that made Hisashi deflate. He envied his kitten's ability to hold on to his logic over his feelings. Hisashi's strong emotions were usually too loud to allow for objective reasoning. But his husband's earnest words let him tune out that all-encompassing rage. He was doing this for the owlet, he couldn't mess this up. Hisashi took a deep breath and thought that he could now be satisfied with only bursting Midoriya Izuku's eardrums. He looked back at his starlight and saw Shouda's approval. "Where is she hiding?" Hisashi asked, determinedly. His kitten's face stretched into his most gruesome Cheshire cat smile as he held up his phone. "Nedza seems to have an idea," Shouta grinned darkly. The apartment where Midoriya Izuku lived was not even in the same city as the address they hand on file for Izuku, and was much nicer. It had a great location, and was full of modern flair. It was the kind of place that made Hisashi glad that Shouta and him were wearing suits and not their hero gear. Hisashi wondered where she was getting the money to have not one, but 2 apartments, and have one that was this expensive. This time Nedzu had made sure Midoriya Izuku was at home before they arrived, so they were not surprised when their knocking was promptly answered. The woman who opened the door was clearly Izuku's mother, as the resemblance was uncanny, except for the eyes. The owlet's eyes were always warm, and usually wide and full of wonder. Midoriya Izuku's eyes were cold. Hisashi smiled with a grin that was full of sharpened teeth. "Midoriya Izuku?" he said with a tone like frost. "We are some of your son's teachers at UA. I think it's time we had a chat." Midoriya Izuku looked as if that was the last thing she wanted to do, but as she saw the people in the hallway she realized the scene she would make if she refused. Without saying a word she stepped back from the entryway and let them in. She led them to the sitting room, which in contrast to the apartment they had just left was filled with knick-knacks and decorated with artwork and pictures, some of which depicted Midoriya Izuku with a taller man that had Izuku's curls. As soon as they all were seated she spoke. "Why are you here?" she asked, voice clearly expressing her distaste with the situation. "We have discovered some things about Midoriya-kun that we should discuss with you," Shouta said, taking the lead as agreed. "He's in the dorms now," she said, raising an eyebrow. "He's supposed to be your problem." "While we are in charge of Midoriya-kun's schooling we are not his parents," Shouta said, "and what has been going on requires his guardians be informed." "What is it?" She sighed, clearly uninterested. "Did you know that your son was bullied extensively at school?" Shouta asked, getting straight to the point. "No," Midoriya Izuku said dismissively. "He was always starting fights. Anything that happened was because Izuku provoked them." "That's not what we saw," Shouta stated firmly. Midoriya Izuku waved that away. "He was always getting on people's nerves," she said. "Trust me, he brought it on himself." "How do you know that?" Shouta pressed. "I'm his mother, I know how he is," Midoriya Izuku said. "I've tried to get him to stop, but he just won't listen. Now he's off playing hero and going to get himself killed. I warned him, but no, he went and did it anyway, the fool." Hisashi was sick of all the bullshit this woman was speaking about her own son, and he could tell his husband was too. Alright, it was time to take off the kid gloves. "Why do you live apart from your son?" Hisashi asked, going straight to the heart of the issue. Midoriya Izuku looked startled for a moment, but soon recovered herself. "This is closer to my work," she answered. "I'm very busy, I don't have time to commute." "Then why didn't you take Midoriya-kun with you?" Hisashi pressed. "He wanted to stay at the other place, and even though I wanted to be together he insisted," she replied after a moment of hesitation. "I couldn't change his mind so I let him stay. He's independent, he can manage fine by himself." Hisashi didn't need to have Detective Tsukachi's quirk to know she was lying. Izuku thrived with other people. He never would have chosen to live apart from his family. Hisashi went with the story for now. "When did he start living on his own?" he asked, studying her. "About a year or so ago," she said, shifting in her seat. Another lie. Even if Hisashi hadn't seen the layer of dust in her room, her body language would have given her away. "And when was the last time you saw Midoriya-kun?" Hisashi shot out. "Last week," she said, not looking him in the eye. "He wanted help moving into the dorms." That was the third strike. Hisashi knew she hadn't seen Izuku then because she hadn't been on the list of approved visitors. Hisashi stopped playing around. "You're lying," Hisashi said, glaring at her. "We've been to Midoriya-kun's apartment, and it's clear you haven't been living with him in some time. And I know Midoriya-kun would never leave his own family, because he never leaves his friends. And you didn't help him move, because you never came to campus." She looked as if she wanted to speak, but Shouta stood up from his seat and loomed over her. "Midoriya Izuku, you are under arrest for charges of child neglect and abandonment. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Izuku felt like his whole life was in chaos. Kachin, his first friend who was destined to become a great hero, had been transferred to general education. Kachin, who was supposed to be the best, had been expelled, while the Deku had remained. How could this have happened? This isn't how it was supposed to go. Izuku thought. Kachin was going to be number one, and I destroyed his dreams. It's all my fault. When Kachin hadn't shown up to class, there had been a flurry of questions from Class 1. Mineta's absence, on the contrary, had elicited to such response. Aizawa-sensei had only said that Kachin had been transferred to 1C, after a review found evidence of actions unbecoming of a hero, and Mineta had been expelled for SXL misconduct. This bare-bones explanation had done absolutely nothing to placate the class, but Aizawa-sensei's firm control of his classroom had prevented any further outbursts until lunch, when the bombardment of questions began. Everyone began exchanging theories, asking if anyone knew what had happened, while some went to find Kachin and talk to him about it. Izuku had kept his head down and done his best to deflect or avoid answering when he had been the focus of attention, but he wasn't sure if it had worked. The Deku squad knew that there was some history between him and Kachin, and Izuku was sure that his claims of not knowing anything wouldn't hold them off for long. What he was more concerned about, however, was the inevitable confrontation between him and Kachin. At the moment he had a bit of a reprieve because Kachin had been suspended for a week as part of his punishment and to give time for the transfer to go through. However, Kachin would soon return, and Izuku knew that if Kachin got his hands on him it wouldn't be pretty. Kachin had been acting strange ever since Kamino, and Izuku knew that his expulsion would be the straw that broke the camel's back. Izuku just hoped he wouldn't be too badly burned by the inevitable explosion. Even with all of this on his mind, his greatest concerns still surpassed these comparatively trivial worries. Mike-sensei and Aizawa-sensei had said that they wanted to meet with his mother, and Izuku could only delay them for so long. It had been pure luck that All Might had been the one to meet with him about moving into the dorms. As the only teacher who wasn't a formal educator, All Might would be the only one to let a thing like parental absence slide. Aizawa-sensei and Mike-sensei would not be so lenient. Not that there was anything wrong with what Mom was doing, Izuku hastily reassured himself. She just works so hard to deal with a burden like me that of course she isn't home very often. And now that I'm in the dorms it's been such a relief to her, so of course she doesn't want to be burdened with my problems. Really, the only reason his mom had let him move into the UA dorms was on the reassurance that he would handle everything himself. He squashed the tiny voice inside him that whispered that he had been handling everything by himself for a long time, even without the dorms. Still, he didn't want to give up his place in UA, and if his mother found out that he had gotten in trouble again, she would definitely pull him from the hero course, if not UA entirely. So here Izuku was, trying to subtly prevent the best underground hero and the smartest spotlight hero from setting up a meeting with his mom. Needless to say, it was not going well, and he was understandably a ball of anxiety when Aizawa-sensei asked to meet him after class. As Izuku sat on his sensei's couch and played with his fingers, he couldn't help but remember all the other times he had had a meeting with Aizawa-sensei. The first one had been an unmitigated disaster, Izuku admitted, as he had suffered a panic attack, revealed his second biggest secret, and clued in his senseis that there was more going on than Izuku wanted to admit. The second time, Aizawa-sensei had turned his whole world upside down when he said that what Kachin had done was wrong and then punished Kachin for it. Izuku prayed that this meeting would be much more normal and nothing would come from it. Those hopes were quickly dashed when Mike-sensei hurried into the office, and Izuku's anxiety went through the roof. What is going to happen this time? Izuku worried. Sorry I'm late, yo. Mike-sensei apologized. This transfer paperwork is a nightmare. Ah, so Mike-sensei is Kachin's new teacher, Izuku thought. That's good, maybe with a role model like Mike-sensei Kachin will finally address his hearing loss. Izuku missed the look Mike-sensei and Aizawa-sensei exchanged over his head, as he was too busy avoiding their gaze. You think that's bad? Try doing it for a whole class, Aizawa-sensei retorted. I think the rat god just likes to see us suffer. Izuku tried to stifle a snort, but from the grins Aizawa-sensei and Mike-sensei were now sporting, he could tell they had heard him. The Aizawa-sensei sobered, and Izuku could tell they were about to get into the real reason for this meeting. You're probably wondering why we called you here, Midoriya, Aizawa-sensei began, and Izuku nodded. There isn't an easy way to say this, so I'll get straight to the point. We met with your mother, Midoriya. Izuku felt like his heart had frozen within his chest. This was bad, this was very, very bad. He knew Aizawa-sensei and Mike-sensei would have to meet with his mother eventually, but he'd thought he'd have more time. He'd thought that he would be able to prepare her, and maybe ask his senseis not to mention one or two choice points. But now they had gone and done it without him, which was the worst-case scenario. He had promised his mother that nothing like this would happen now that he was at the dorms, and then this exact thing had happened. She is going to pull me from you, Izuku thought frantically. She only let me go because I promised I wouldn't be a burden, and then I was anyway. I don't want to go, I'm finally going to be able to accomplish my dream. What will All Might think when I quit? He'll be so disappointed. Mike-sensei and Aizawa-sensei will be too. Hey, you listener, let's be sure to breathe, yeah? Mike-sensei's voice broke through the downward spiral of Izuku's thoughts. Deep breath in and out, alright? Izuku tried to follow his sensei's instructions, and after a few rounds he did feel a bit better. What did you talk about? Izuku stuttered, his nerves evident in his voice. We intended to discuss your shifter status and events that occurred at Aldra Junior High, Aizawa-sensei said, but we ran into some problems. Cub, did you know your mother lives in a different apartment? Static filled Izuku's ears. What? Shouta hated to be the bearer of bad news. He unfortunately had a lot of practice delivering it, like most underground heroes, but he just wasn't equipped to be the comforting presence that the victims generally needed. And now he was forced to tell the cub the truth about his mother's reprehensible actions and how they were forced to arrest her. He didn't regret putting Midoriya Izuku in jail, and in fact thought she had gotten off pretty lightly considering what he wanted to do to her. Ever since he saw the evidence of her abandonment, he had been itching to punish her for what she did, but the confessions he had heard from Detective Tsukachi had pushed him over the edge. Apparently, her deplorable treatment of her own son began when the cub received his diagnosis as quirkless. Her husband left, and she grew bitter, blaming the cub for all of her problems. She stopped caring for Izuku and became distant, calling him useless and a burden. As he grew older, she forced him to be in charge of the cooking and the cleaning, and only did the bare minimum herself. She started staying out more and more, spending her time in hotel rooms or friends' houses. When the cub turned 12, she moved out entirely into the new apartment without letting Izuku know. She would leave a feeble amount of money for rent and essentials each month and pretended that the reason they never saw each other was because she was working so much. It seems that she had stayed in touch with Midoriya Hisashi, who had encouraged her to get away from her son and was the one paying for the second apartment. Shouta had been said when he had gotten the full report, and his heart ached that the cub had suffered so much for so long. It truly was a miracle that the cub had gotten into UA and finally gotten the help he needed. Shouta had luckily had a good home life, with a mother and father who loved him, so he couldn't relate to Izuku there, but he did understand UA being a refuge. Shouta had been bullied mercilessly in school for having a villain's quirk, and had constantly been forced to wear a BLNDFLD by the administration and teachers. UA hadn't been like that, though, and he counted his lucky stars that Nezu had seen his potential and helped him transfer into the hero course, achieve his dreams, and meet the love of his life. Except it hadn't truly been a refuge for the cub, had it? Shouta thought to himself. You threatened to expel him and ignored what was going on. You even forced him to work with his abuser. Unlike Hisashi, Shouta couldn't forgive himself for his actions towards the cub so easily. It was this failure that made him determined to do all he could to help the cub now. Thus, he steeled his nerves and called the cub into a meeting to discuss his mother. Like all meetings Shouta had had with the cub, It was going badly. As soon as Shouta had mentioned the other apartment, Izuku's anxiety had tipped him over the edge, and it seemed like dissociation or another panic attack were imminent. Neither were acceptable, so Shouta shot a desperate look at his husband to take charge of the situation. Hisashi was the better people person, and he was the one who had experienced a poor home life, so he was the best one to take the lead. Plus, Shouta didn't want to hurt Izuku any more than he already had. Hisashi shot him a look that said they'd talk about this later, then moved to kneel in front of the cub while Shouta made his way around the desk. "You're okay, listener," his sunshine said gently. "We're here for you. Can I touch you?" The cub turned and looked at his birdie with wide green eyes that stared unseeingly, but slowly nodded. Hisashi took the cub's hands in his own and softly rubbed circles with his thumbs. "I know this is hard to hear, but we'll be with you every step of the way," Hisashi continued. "Can you come back to us, kiddo?" It took a couple of minutes of reassurances and the soothing tones of his husband, but soon the cub blinked and his green eyes shone brighter with returned awareness. "You back with us, cub?" Shouta asked softly, crouching next to his sunshine. "Weiss," Izuku stuttered quietly, subtly and likely unconsciously leaning into the physical comfort Hisashi was applying. "Are you all right with continuing?" Hisashi asked. "We can talk about this later if you need. Your well-being is our top priority." The cub took a bit to answer, and Shouta could tell that he wasn't fully back to 100%. "Why you can keep going," Izuku answered, tone more determined. His eyes flashed with the strength that Shouta knew would make him a good hero. "Okay," Shouta said, "but give us the word and we'll stop, understood?" "Now, from your reaction I'm going to guess you didn't know that your mother had a different apartment." "And no, I didn't," Izuku answered, shaking his head. "It must have been recent. She must have moved once the D-dorms were implemented." Shouta and his husband exchanged a dismayed glance at that. "She is recorded as moving in 3 years ago," Hisashi broke the news. Gently. Izuku grew more distressed at that. She must have got it to be closer to her work," the cub tried to rationalize. "She has to work so much because of me." "What do you mean, because of you?" Shouta asked, concerned. With me being a late bloomer, it's hard to have a quirkless kid," Izuku said, not meeting their eyes. "Places charge more. I'm expensive." Shouta wasn't quite satisfied with that explanation. He knew quirk discrimination was alive and well, both he and Hisashi had first-hand experience with it, but often it wasn't on site if you didn't have an obvious mutation. The stores nearby the Midoriya's apartment might have learned that Izuku was quirkless and charged more, but places further away wouldn't. For someone who was as money-conscious as Midoriya Izuku claimed to be, she would have known that. Apartments were a different matter, as they required identification, so they would likely have raised prices, but probably not to the extent that merited the amount of work Midoriya Izuku claimed to be doing. So not only had the cub's mother neglected her child, but she had blamed said child for it as well. This was making Shouta more and more glad that they had arrested Midoriya Izuku. Speaking of which, they had yet to break the news to Izuku. "No matter the reason, you should have been told that your mother had a different place," Hisashi said. "When was the last time you spoke with her?" "I messaged her about a meeting with YU," the cub evaded. "Did she answer you?" Shouta asked. Izuku shook his head. But she's very busy," Izuku hastened to justify, "as she usually doesn't." Shouta and his sunshine exchanged a distressed look at that. Shouta took a deep breath and nodded to Hisashi. It was time. "Izuku, kiddo, that's not okay," Hisashi said sadly but firmly. "You're a minor, and you need a guardian that communicates with you and takes care of you. It seems like your mother hadn't been doing that for a while, and that's child neglect. In light of her actions we had to arrest her." Hisashi's heart was breaking for Midoriya. Not only had they blindsided him with the fact of his mother's emotional abuse and neglect, they also had to tell him about his mother's arrest. Hisashi knew what it was like to have your own terrible parents put in jail. When his mother and father had finally been arrested, part of him had been devastated as the last bit of his family was taken away, even after all the torture they had inflicted on him. The other part had been rejoicing at the chance to be free from suffering at last, but it had taken time and years of therapy for Hisashi to finally accept those feelings. Midoriya was clearly experiencing the former, because as soon as Hisashi had said that they had arrested his mother, Midoriya had shut down. No, 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 Midoriya chanted, rocking back and forth in his seat while shaking his head frantically. Midoriya pulled his hands away from Hisashi's soothing grip and twisted his scarred fingers into his hair, tugging at the green curls. Hisashi grimaced at that action of self-harm. Midoriya clearly wasn't handling this well. "It's okay, listener. Please don't do that to yourself," Hisashi coaxed, hands hovering over Midoriya's own. "Let's let go of those nice curls, all right?" Midoriya didn't seem to hear him, still frantically uttering denials. Hisashi gestured towards the desk with his head, and Shouta understood, grabbing a fidget device from one of his drawers. "Cub, I have something you could use instead of your hair," Shouta said gently, holding the fidget device out towards Midoriya. "Can you grab that from me, Cub?" That seemed to get through to him as Midoriya reached out and took the fidget device from his husband. Something about the device seemed to interest Midoriya as he eventually released both his hands from his hair and began using the device instead. This change in routine seemed to break Midoriya out of his shock as he stopped his chanting and looked up at the two of them with wild eyes. "Tish, there has to be a mistake," Midoriya rushed out. "It is all my fault, didn't do anything wrong." Hisashi shook his head. "It is not your fault," Hisashi said firmly. "Midoriya Inko is an adult, and responsible for her own actions." "It can't be true," Midoriya denied. "She confessed to Detective Tsukachi," Hisashi stated, knowing this was hard for Midoriya but wanting to cut off these self-flagellating thoughts fast. He confirmed the truth of her statements. "Then, if she's guilty, so am I," Midoriya exclaimed. "You should arrest me too. I am made her do everything." "No, Cub," Shouta cut off Midoriya's desperate reasonings. "You did not. She, and Midoriya Hisashi, did it all by themselves. Do not blame yourself for what they did." At this, Midoriya started sobbing, letting out rivers of tears as he wrapped his arms around himself in a self-hug. "Oh, you listener," Hisashi said sadly. It was terrible seeing bright, sunshine kid Midoriya so clearly devastated. For a moment Hisashi wished that they had never had to get Midoriya out of such a bad situation, but he shook the thought away. It was no good to anyone if he got lost reminiscing about what-ifs. "Can I hug you, Cub?" Hisashi asked, wanting to comfort the crying teen. But Midoriya shook his head, and Hisashi's heart clenched. He hoped Midoriya wouldn't blame them for being the ones to arrest his mother. Hisashi didn't think Midoriya was like that, but this wasn't a typical situation and the teen's feelings might soon shift towards resentment. He knew what it was like to not want anyone near you, and he respected Midoriya's wishes, but he wished he could do more to help him. Knowing anything big wouldn't be well received, Hisashi started to gently hum a soft tune, using a bit of his quirk to infuse his voice with soothing vibrations. It was the same thing he did when his Starlight had had a particularly bad patrol and couldn't stand another person's touch. Thankfully, what worked for the jaded underground hero also seemed to work for the distraught teen, and Midoriya's shuddering sobs eventually petered out. His kitten grabbed a tissue box and handed it to the cub, who took it wordlessly and cleaned himself up. Midoriya looked up at them with red-rimmed eyes that seemed to have lost their last bit of hope. Hisashi shared a dismayed look with his husband. "What happens now?" Midoriya asked in a flat tone of voice. The lack of stuttering would usually have been a good sign, but it was clear that the cub had retreated into himself in his grief and was not fully there. Hisashi knew it was time to wrap the meeting up so Midoriya could have time to process. "You'll stay in you," Shouta reassured, and Hisashi could have sworn that Midoriya had relaxed a fraction at those words. "And for now you will become a ward of the school. That means I am your de facto guardian until a more permanent arrangement can be made. If you would like a different guardian, that can be done. Further decisions will come depending on the trial verdict." "Will I need to testify?" Midoriya asked again in that same dead tone of voice. "You are not required to testify," Hisashi said firmly, wanting to make sure to let Midoriya know that he wouldn't be forced to do anything. "Your mother's lawyer can answer further questions about the legal process." "I want to testify," Midoriya stated with determination. Hisashi inwardly grimaced. He was sure that wasn't a good idea, for Midoriya's mental health and the case against his mother. If the jury saw how Midoriya felt responsible for his mother's actions, Midoriya Izuku's sentence would not be a light one. "Can I see her?" Midoriya continued. A bit more awareness seemed to return to the cub then, as he seemed to wait anxiously for a response. "No, you cannot," Shouta said with a hint of regret, shaking his head. "The parties involved are required to remain separated until the trial." At that, Midoriya deflated, and any life that remained in those green eyes was snuffed. Hisashi's heart ached for the green being, who was suffering so much for a woman that didn't deserve it. "May I be excused?" Midoriya asked flatly. "You can go," Hisashi said gently, "but know that both Shouta and I are here for you." "You are excused from classes for the rest of the week," Shouta said firmly. "Take this time to recover." Midoriya just nodded and left. The fact that he didn't protest being taken out of class was just another piece of evidence that showed that the cub was not okay. As soon as the door had closed behind the cub, his Starlight slumped down onto the couch with a sigh, rubbing his hands over his eyes before dragging his hands down his face. He rested his stubbled chin on his pressed-together hands and stared forward with dark eyes. "Did we do the right thing, Zashi?" his husband asked, his voice unsure. Hisashi sighed and sat on the couch next to his kitten. "It's hard for a kid when you don't think what your parents did was wrong," Hisashi replied, mind back when he was 16, and was finally able to charge his parents for their wrongdoing. "It was hard for me, and I knew what they were doing wasn't right. The cub will come around, but it might take a while. We just have to be there for him during that time." "What if he doesn't want us around?" Sho asked, his gruff voice not hiding his worry. Hisashi had to hide a smile. His Starlight really was a softie for his kids. He gently moved a strand of curls out of his husband's face and cupped a cheek gently with one hand, coaxing his kitten to look him in the eye. "You've been through a lot together, and eventually he will see how you have helped him," Hisashi said with more confidence than he felt. He pulled Shouta into his side and pressed a kiss on his Starlight's forehead before tucking the shorter man's head under his chin. "We just have to be patient. Izuku feels as if he is drowning. Only one thought circles through his head relentlessly. Mom was arrested, Mom is in jail, Mom is gone, and it is all my fault. It was probably lucky that they had already had shift training this week, and he wasn't able to assume his soul animal form at the moment, even though he wanted to. It would probably be easier to be a saber-toothed tiger at the moment, further removed from everything that happened." Even after his senseis had explained, he couldn't believe it. His mother hadn't done anything wrong. Sure, he hadn't known that she had gotten another apartment, but he was certain she had her reasons. Besides, she deserved something nicer than their small apartment in the city outskirts, tainted with his presence. If she was able to get away, then how could he blame her? He was just a useless, stupid Deku after all. He didn't blame his senseis either. They didn't know, they didn't understand. They still thought he was a late bloomer, instead of a worthless, quirkless burden. He didn't deserve their attempts at kindness. There were other, more worthy recipients that they could be helping instead. And he hated himself for enjoying their charity, for pretending that he deserved it, for playing into the fantasy for just a little bit longer. But his mother didn't deserve to be treated like a criminal because he was a failure, because he was a thief and villain. And so now he was faced with an impossible problem. Does he reveal his quirkless status and get his mother out of jail, and expose All Might and his secret in the process? Or does he continue to pretend that he is a late bloomer, defending All Might but condemning his mother to prison, an innocent among criminals and villains? This dilemma consumed his thoughts as he made his way to his dorm room, using his skills honed by a decade of bullying to fade into the background and avoid his classmates automatically. He was sure they'd mean well with their questions and concern, but they were incurable gossips, and if he arrived looking like he did after coming from Aizawa-sensei's office, they wouldn't let it go. And he didn't want to explain what was going on to anyone. He wanted to keep this quiet until he figured a way out. He was glad Kacchan was suspended and moving into another dorm, because he was never able to avoid Kacchan for long. Even worse, Kacchan loved his Auntie Inko, and Izuku's mother had loved Kacchan from the moment he was born. If Kacchan ever found out that Deku had gotten his beloved auntie arrested, The fallout would not be pretty, and Izuku would be at the center of ground zero. This just added another reason for Izuku to resolve this problem as soon as possible. He eventually managed to dodge everyone and make it to his dorm room, where he rushed to his laptop and started looking up anything that he could use to free his mother. He was a hero nerd and knew a lot about hero law, but a civilian arrest was a little out of his wheelhouse, as that was normally police procedure. Some hours had passed and Izuku was deep into a legal rabbit hole about parent and guardian responsibilities for minors when his phone buzzed on the desk next to him. He pushed back from the desk and stretched, wincing when his cramped and recently healed fingers ached as they flexed away from the keyboard. He rubbed his burned elbow to try and soothe some of the deep pain in the joint and grabbed his phone to see who was contacting him. It was All Might, sending him a text. Midoriya Shouta. I heard you are excused from class this week. Is everything all right? His mentor messaged. Izuku's heart swelled with happiness as he saw the evidence of his mentor's care, but that vanished when he remembered the reason behind All Might's concern. If only his mentor had been told the reason for his excused absence. That his chosen successor was such a villain that he got his own mother arrested for his own terrible actions. But, then again, All Might already knew. He was the one person who knew he was quirkless, so he would understand that it was all Izuku's fault and not his mother's. Plus, he was All Might. If anyone had the political power to get someone out of jail, it was him, even if his mentor was in retirement. Plus, he was good friends with Detective Tsukachi, who was well respected and had the perfect quirk for this. If Izuku could tell him what was really going on, he would see that he was being truthful, and maybe he could get the charges against his mother dropped. The only problem was that All Might would see the depths of his depravity, how he was such a burden to his own mother that in her attempts to care for him, she was arrested. Once he knew the truth, he would probably take the quirk back, crushing Izuku's dream and kicking him out of UA. But it wasn't as if I deserved the quirk in the first place, Izuku reasoned to himself. It was only a matter of time before he realized and took the quirk back. Izuku sniffed and rubbed at his eyes to wipe away the gathering tears. He didn't want to give up on his dream, but he owed it to his mother to get her out of the mess he had made. Izuku took a shaky breath in and typed a reply back to All Might. Hi All Might, Izuku wrote, Aizawa-sensei told me some news and I need your help. Can we meet soon? They met up on the pathway Izuku usually took on his morning runs. The sun was setting, and the orange light cast even stronger shadows on All Might's face. His mentor's casts and bandages were mostly removed, and Izuku was glad that All Might was getting better. Midoriya Shouta. All Might called out when he saw Izuku, I am here. As you requested. What did you want to talk about? Izuku took a deep breath and twisted his fingers nervously, regretting leaving the fidget device in his room. He was deeply afraid, but he had made up his mind. He would help his mom, even if it was the last thing he did as a hero. See, could you get my mom out of FJ jail? Izuku asked, wide eyes pleading at All Might with their emerald gaze. All Might winced. Ah, I thought this meeting might be about that, his mentor said, partially to himself. His wide grin had fallen into a more serious expression. I can't go against the justice system. From what I heard from now, Aizawa and Mike had good reasons for arresting your mother. But they don't understand. Izuku protested. They don't know that I'm quirkless. If they did, they know it is all my fault. Doesn't deserve this. Please, All Might can't you do something? I'm sorry my boy, All Might said, shaking his head with a sad expression, but no. This was the second time Izuku had been told no by All Might, and this time hurt just as much as the first. Shouta was worried about his cub. Not only had Izuku not protested his exclusion from class during the week, he had also avoided both him and Hizashi the whole time. It seemed as if he had holed himself up in his dorm room, and every time Shouta caught a glimpse of him the kid had bigger eye bags and a paler face. So far he hadn't pressed the issue, wanting to give Izuku time and space to reflect on his own feelings about the situation and about Shouta. However, he didn't want to let the cub back into class if he wasn't in the right headspace, and as Izuku's new guardian he wanted to check in and make sure that he was alright. Therefore it was a relief when the kid sent him a message and asked Shouta if he could still do training. Hizashi immediately vetoed doing quirk training, and Shouta didn't blame him. Training a powerful quirk was a delicate operation by itself. Add on the fact that the quirk could cause debilitating harm to its user, couple it with the user struggling in a difficult emotional PRD, and any quirk training is more likely to result in injury than improvement. However, shift training was still on the table, and truly it was better for the cub to have it. Consistent schedule of shifting while he was still getting used to his form. Thus Shouta was waiting for both his husband and the cub in the rafters of Gym Theta. He'd finished a final training session with Shinso before his transfer into the hero course and had managed to sneak in a quick nap before this next commitment. Patrols had been rough recently, with the retirement of All Might. Every 2-bit criminal was trying their hand at villainy. Plus he had heard rumors of a new quirk drag going around, which brought back memories of the disaster that was Trigger. Dealing with all of that while trying to do the best for the cub, Shinso, and all of Class 1A meant that Shouta was more exhausted than usual and was trying to grab any moments of sleep he could. His mostly peaceful rest was broken by the sound of the gym door opening. He cracked his eyes open to see who had entered, but his question was quickly answered when he heard the sound of whistling. "Sho!" His sunshine called, scanning the gym for his presence before looking up and spotting his yellow sleeping bag. "You want me to come up to you, Starlight?" "I'll come to you," Shouta refuted. He grabbed the sleeping bag and used his capture weapon to descend while upside down till he was face to face with his birdie. "There ya are, my Spider-Man," Hizashi said, smiling. Shouta scoffed. "I'm not Spider-Man, he's just a myth," Shouta disagreed, rolling his eyes. "Plus, I'd never wear spandex." "Well, if you're not Spider-Man, how come I can do this?" His husband asked playfully before cradling Shuta's upside-down head and pressing a kiss to his lips. Shouta returned the affection, using one hand to cup the back of his sunshine's head as he kept up the kiss while reorientating till he was standing right side up. They exchanged another kiss before Shouta drew away, not wanting the cub to walk in on the pair of them making out. He moved to put away his sleeping bag, and called back to his birdie with a smirk. "If I'm Spider-Man, then you're Jonah Jameson," Shouta said with his Cheshire cat grin. "What? I am not." Hizashi squawked, and Shouta chuckled softly, then quickly sobered. "I'm worried about the cub," Shouta said, stowing his sleeping bag. "I told you it would take time," his husband said, "but I agree. I've never seen the listener isolate themselves like this." "Should I step in?" Shouta asked, deferring to his sunshine's experience and understanding. "I don't want to make anything worse by forcing my presence on him. I think we don't want the cub confusing us, giving him space with us distancing ourselves from him," his birdie mused. "We should make sure we're available for him, especially since you're his guardian. Why don't you invite him to join us at the nearby cat cafe after training?" Shouta nodded, and was about to answer when the door to the gym opened and Izuku walked in. Shouta was pleased to note that the cub had kept the fidget device and was currently using it, but was saddened about how Izuku was clearly not doing well. His curls were limp and his green eyes, dulled with exhaustion, were shifting nervously around the gym while keeping both Shouta and Hizashi in his vision. "Hello, Aizawa-sensei," the cub said, nerves evident in his voice. "Hey cub," Shouta said with a steady voice, hoping his even tone and the personal nickname would help calm Izuku. "Are you ready for shift training? We can postpone it if you need." "And no, I can do this," the cub said, shaking his head, then swiftly changed the subject. What are we working on today?" Shouta exchanged a glance with his husband, noting Izuku's reluctance to talk about how he was doing, but let it slide for the moment. They do a relatively calm training session, and Shouta would keep an eye out going forward, and ask his sunshine and the other teachers to do the same. He'd scheduled Izuku for an appointment with Hound Dog next week, not wanting to pile another thing on the kid's already heavy load, but now he was regretting not putting it sooner. "Let's start with a shift," his birdie said, taking over. "And we'll try using a different strategy to trigger it. We did visualization last time, yeah?" "Wise, and it worked well for me," the cub said, sounding like he was a little less nervous. "And that's good," Hizashi encouraged, "but we still should try other strategies. You may find another that works just as well, or better. It's always good to have options, you dig?" Izuku nodded. "Great. So this time we'll use a memory. What you need to focus on dash. Hizashi's voice got quieter as Shouta moved away. He didn't use a memory to shift, while his husband did, so Hizashi was the better person to talk about it. He kept an eye on the pair as Shouta pulled out blocks, mats, and other equipment to set up a basic obstacle course. He could see the cub and his sunshine take a seat and close their eyes. They sat in silence for a bit before the painful noises began and a saber-toothed tiger took the place of Izuku. A flash of pride stormed through him at the cub's accomplishment, but it was offset a bit by his worry. A fast shift early on could mean that the shifter wanted to escape from their life, and Izuku did have a lot he might want to escape from. We're working on it, Shouta thought to himself, shifting into his own panther form and padding over to the forms of a cockatoo and a saber-toothed tiger. I won't let him become me. Hizashi thought that the shift training session was going well. After Sho had set up the obstacle course, the panther had demonstrated for the owlet what to do, proceeding through the obstacles with Izuku on his tail. After the cub had run through it a couple times and both Hizashi and his starlight had deemed him ready, they had added harder and more difficult obstacles, testing Izuku's ability to climb, jump, and crawl in his soul form. Hizashi mostly served as an outside and objective observer, letting his kitten take the lead in coaching Izuku in what to do, while he kept an eye on the listener. What he saw concerned him. The owlet was very careful with his front legs, clearly anticipating pain, and it broke Hizashi's heart to see the evidence of how much his chronic pain ruled Izuku's life. He made a mental note to confer with his husband about getting the cub some physical therapy and better pain management, as well as a fighting style that wouldn't continue to put his well-being at risk. It was true that Izuku had made leaps and bounds in his quirk use since Hizashi had first seen him take on the zero-pointer, but the current state of the listener's bodily injuries made it clear that drastic improvements still needed to be made. Aside from the owlet's physical well-being, Hizashi could tell that Izuku was still not doing well emotionally. The cub had relaxed and opened up a bit since his nerves at the beginning of the session, the possibilities of his soul form intriguing the listener's analytical mind, but it was clear that Izuku had a lot on his brain and needed help. However, something was preventing the owlet from asking Sho for assistance, as the saber-toothed tiger made sure to keep a respectful distance from the panther. Hizashi sighed. It seemed like both Izuku and his husband tended to withdraw when in difficult social situations, even when it would be better for them to reach out and rely on others. Hizashi knew his starlight blamed himself for the cub's situation and wasn't going to force the listener to spend time with the person who put his mother in jail, but he didn't know Izuku's reasoning. He was pretty sure that it wasn't because the owlet blamed his kitten, as Izuku wasn't one to hold grudges and didn't have a negative bone in his body if his treatment of Bakugo was any indication, but there was something coming between his husband and the cub. Hopefully some time at the cat cafe could help lower everyone's walls and let Izuku know they were there for him while reassuring Sho that his presence was wanted. After one more run through the course, Hizashi helped the listener shift back while his husband put away the equipment. Thank you for the tea training senseis, Izuku said once everyone was ready to leave. Is there anything else why you need from me? Hizashi gave a pointed look to his starlight to prompt him into speech. We did have a suggestion, his kitten said, and Hizashi could read his subtle cues to tell that he was nervous. We know this is a difficult time, and we've been trying to give you space to process, but we'd like to get to know you better and spend time with you as your guardians. If you want to, and you can say no, we'd like to go to a cat cafe with you. We could also go somewhere else if you'd prefer. If that's very nice of you senseis, Izuku said, nervously twisting the fidget toy. But I don't want tea to bother you. You are not bothering us, nor are you a burden, Hizashi reassured. We want to spend time with you, okay? Now, keeping that in mind, do you want to go? The cub bit his lip and seemed to be at war with himself for a moment, before he nodded. I'm glad, cub, Shouta said kindly as Hizashi inwardly cheered. They made their way to the Perfect Cup, a cat cafe that had been the favorite of Shouta and Hizashi since they started at UA as students, not only because it was close to the school and had adorable, well-taken care of felines, but it also made great coffee and pastries. His starlight didn't have a sweet tooth and preferred savory foods, but this cafe was one of the few places where his husband would indulge in a dessert. Hizashi ordered his usual honey lemon tea and strawberry shortcake, and got his kitten his typical espresso and dark chocolate cake. "What would you like, kiddo?" Hizashi asked, turning to Izuku. "It's on us." The owlet made as if to protest, but his husband cut him off. "Between the two of us we work 5 jobs, cub," Shouta said, dismissing the Izuku's bluster. "We can afford a drink and a pastry. Get what you want." The lil listener caved and ordered a matcha latte and a raspberry white chocolate cheesecake. They gathered their orders and settled on a group of plush armchairs surrounding a coffee table. It didn't take long after they sat down for cats to immediately begin flocking to Shouta and Izuku. It seemed as if the cats could recognize his husband's feline soul form and thought of his starlight as one of them, making his kitten act like a cat magnet. This little quirk of Shouta had been true of his husband as long as Hizashi could remember, and his starlight was constantly running into strays on patrol. Apparently, the cats also recognized the cub's feline soul form and were dogpiling the lil listener with equal fervor. Hizashi hid a chuckle behind his hand and sneakily took a picture of the cat-covered pair. His kitten caught him in the act and shot him a glare, but his look softened as he took in the cub's appearance, who was unsuccessfully trying to give every approaching feline equal attention and pets while keeping his cheesecake out of reach. Hizashi was soon distracted from taking more photos when a kitten jumped into his lap and started playing with his hair, which he had let out from his signature hero style. Cats also seemed to recognize his bird soul form and often saw him as an object to play with. To preempt any playful bites, Hizashi grabbed one of the helpfully provided wand toys and soon had a group stalking the feathered end. They relaxed for a while, playing with the cats and enjoying their food and drinks while chatting about nothing. Through it all, Hizashi kept an eye on the owlet. Izuku had gotten more relaxed as time went on, but now he had gotten more quiet and withdrawn. Before Hizashi could ask if everything was all right, the cub spoke up. "Why you doing all this, senseis?" Izuku asked sadly. "What do you mean, kiddo?" Hizashi asked gently. "Yes," the owlet said, gesturing around them, "taking me to places, treating me nicely. I don't deserve it tea." "That's not true, Izuku," Shouta refuted. "You are a good, bright, and kind kid and you deserve nice things, and you deserve to be cared for. We know this has been a hard time for you, and so we wanted to give you a good experience." "And no," Izuku shook his head, "why you don't understand? It's my fault. My mom is in jail because of me." "Cub," Hizashi said softly, kneeling in front of the distressed teen, "Midoriya Izuku made her own decisions and that is not on you. I know you might feel responsible, but that is not the case. I know because I had parents that mistreated me, and when they went to jail, I thought that it was my fault. That if I had just been a better son, things wouldn't have turned out the way they did. It took a long time for me to accept the truth that my parents were wrong to put the responsibility for their actions on me, and that they had no one to blame but themselves. I know this is hard to hear, and you may not believe it right now, but will help you see that it is not your fault one day." "It's different," Izuku argued. "Why you have a quirk?" "Having a quirk or not does not make a difference," his husband said, joining Hizashi by kneeling at his side. "Being a late bloomer does not excuse Midoriya Izuku's, or anyone else's, treatment of you." "But I'm not a late bloomer," Izuku whispered brokenly. "What?" Hizashi and Shouta asked simultaneously. The lil listener finally looked up at them, tears swimming in his green eyes. "I lied." Izuku was trying to hide how hard he was shaking from his senseis, but he knew it was futile. Both of his senseis were observant even on the worst of days, and they were on high alert after his confession in the cat cafe. Realizing that the rest of the conversation was better continued in private, the trio had returned to his sensei's apartment, and now Izuku was sitting on their sofa, trying to gather the last of his courage to speak out and ruin the only relationships he had left. Not only would he be breaking All Might's trust by revealing the truth about the quirk, Aizawa-sensei and Mike-sensei would be sure to want nothing to do with him after revealing that Izuku truly was quirkless and not a late bloomer. "I owe it to Mom," Izuku thought, unconsciously trying to convince himself that this was the best way. "Because All Might won't help her, it's up to me to correct my failures. And once Aizawa-sensei and Mike-sensei know, They'll realize that it was truly my fault and drop the charges against Mom. I have to do this. Izuku resurfaced from his thoughts and saw that his senseis were looking concernedly at him, with Mike Sensei holding out to him a steaming cup of tea. Izuku blushed. They must have called out to him and he hadn't responded. Stupid Deku, you need to be more aware. He took the cup and held it with both hands, the warmth seeping out of the ceramic and easing the ache in his bones. I find that difficult talks go best with a cup of tea, Mike Sensei said gently, taking a sip from his own mug. You don't have to talk right now if you don't want to, cub, Aizawa Sensei reassured, but we will have to address what you said in the cafe at some point. Do you want anyone else here with you for support? Izuku shook his head. He didn't want his classmates to know the depths of his incompetence and call him a coward, but he wanted to put off the confrontation with all might from spilling his secret as long as possible. I'll talkin' now, Izuku said, taking a shaking breath in. His senseis exchanged a look. Okay, but remember that you can stop at any time, all right, lil listener? Mike Sensei said earnestly. Would you like us to ask you questions, or would you prefer to lead the conversation at your own pace? Cue questions, Izuku answered. He knew he tended to ramble and devolve into mumbling. Maybe this way they could stay on track and prevent Izuku from saying more than he should. We can do that, Aizawa Sensei nodded. He then took a deep breath and asked, what did you mean when you said that you lied about being a late bloomer? I am meant that him enada el late be bloomer, Izuku responded, steeling himself. I am quirkless. Izuku then ducked his head, not wanting to see the looks of revulsion on his sensei's faces. They were silent for a moment, then Mike Sensei spoke. But Izuku, you have a quirk, he said, sounding confused. It's and not mine, Izuku refuted, shaking his head. IIW was given it. At those words, the atmosphere in the room grew more tense. Izuku shrank into himself. This was it, this was the moment they rejected him for good. Cub, I need you to be honest with me, Aizawa Sensei started seriously. Did you get a quirk from All for One? Are you safe? At that, Izuku's head shot up. What? No. Izuku vehemently denied, his nervous stutter going away in his surprise. I didn't get the quirk from All for One. I didn't even know about him until after I fought Stain. Izuku paused, then realized what he had just said and paled. I mean after a Stain fought to the Nomu. Relax, kiddo, we already knew about your fight with the hero killer, Mike Sensei reassured him. When you students got involved the school was notified so as to best handle it. Izuku sighed in relief. Useless. I can't even keep a secret that's less important than One for All. We will address how you knew about All for One that early later. Aizawa Sensei got them back on track. Coming back to your earlier statement, if All for One didn't give you a quirk, who did? Izuku closed his eyes. This was the moment of truth. I'm sorry, All Might. I have to do this. For Mom. All Might gave I to me, Izuku said somberly. I am to the N9th W wielder O of 1F for All and H's S successor. There was silence in the room after Izuku dropped that bombshell. Mike Sensei rallied first. Well, that explains your close relationship with him, he mused. I noticed that All for One and One for All are eerily similar. Why is that? From what All Might T told me, there were once two B brothers, Izuku explained. O1 had the power to give A and take Q quirks, and O1 was W weak and Q quirkless. One W wanted to rule the W world, and the quirkless O1 disagreed. All for O1 gave a S stockpiling quirk to the Q quirkless brother A as punishment, B but unbeknownst to anyone, the brother did have a Q quirk, the Q quirk to P pass on Q quirks. These T2 quirks emerged to make 1F for All. Since then users O of 1F for All F fought against All for O1. Izuku suddenly felt his quirk be suppressed, and looked up at his senseis, startled. Aizawa Sensei was staring ahead with a quirk-infused glare, his post-shift fangs poking over his lips in a snarl, while Mike Sensei was pressing his lips together as if preventing himself from speaking while his hair had started to fluff up like a cockatoo's crest. Just as soon as Izuku noticed his sensei's reaction, they relaxed back into a more neutral stance, and Izuku almost questioned if he had imagined it. That's a lot to put on one kid, cub, Aizawa-sensei said, with a hint of a growl in his tone. How did you come to receive one for all? Do why you know A about the sludge villain? Izuku asked. Both of his senseis nodded in affirmation. Yeah, Bakugo was held hostage, a kid ran in to help him, and All Might rescued them both at the last minute, Mike-sensei said. Of course, it was also a great example of the incompetence of some heroes. I know you ranted about it for weeks, Sho. Did you end up going to Netsu-san? Yes, they needed to be dealt with, Aizawa-sensei said darkly. Last I heard they're receiving mandatory hostage negotiation training and have to patrol with a partner until they receive their certification of completion. Of course that's pretty light considering a kid almost died, but the HPSC pushed back so that's what they got. But go on, Cub, what about the sludge villain? That D-Day was W&IM at all might, Izuku responded. Of course, you were the kid who jumped in. Mike-sensei exclaimed. I knew that head of hair was familiar. Is that when you met him? Sort of, Izuku explained. I actually first met him earlier that day. The sludge V-villain attacked me and wanted to use me as a meat suit, but All Might rescued me. It was the best day of my life when he woke me up and I saw that my hero was right in front of me and had signed my notebook. However, like a stupid Deku, I grabbed onto him when he jumped away, and luckily he landed on a roof before I could fall off. Then I asked him if IIC could be a hero while quirkless. He then ran out of tea time and showed me his injury, and said if he got hurt this be bad with a quirk, then no dash. And here Izuku's breath hitched for a second, but he pushed past it. It doesn't matter that he told me no, I'm over it, it was a long time ago. IC couldn't be a hero, then left. Then I heard explosions and I ran to see Keikachin being attacked, and I realized I must have made him drop the villain and it was my fault, so I had to save him. You know what happened next. Then afterward All Might said that I had inspired him and that a true hero rushes in without thinking. Izuku could have sworn he heard Aizawa-sensei snort at that. He said IC could be a hero with his quirk and so he trained me so that my limbs wouldn't be blown off when I got it. He gave it to me the D-Day of the entrance exam. Izuku finished. He could tell his senseis had more questions, but he pushed on. He had to get back to the real purpose of this talk. But now that why you know I'm quirkless, you have to know that it's all my fault, not my mom's, Izuku pleaded. Even all might knows that I'm a useless Deku because I'm quirkless, so you should blame me for what happened instead of her. Please, can't you drop the CH charges? Shoyuta was simultaneously heartbroken and enraged for his cub. It seemed like every aspect of Midoriya's life had been against him from the start. From his mother abandoning him because of his quirk status, his teachers abusing him and damaging his reputation, his friends turning on him, his classmates suicide baiting him, his hero, All Might, crushing his dreams in a vulnerable moment, and then his mentor giving him a quirk that destroyed his body and painted a target on his back. Any of these would have deeply scarred a person. To have Midoriya experience all of them and still want to do good was awe-inspiring. However, what was a problem was that Midoriya didn't see anything wrong with how he was treated. Sure, his cub probably knew that what had happened wasn't normal and didn't happen to other kids, but because of his quirk status, or former quirk status. Shoyuta didn't know how that was classified in this unique situation. Midoriya thought that good things shouldn't happen to him. That he needed to be punished just for existing. That was where the heartbreak stemmed from. His heart hurt for his cub, his kid, and Shoyuta would be scheduling that appointment with Hound Dog immediately. He was out of his depth trying to fight against years of societal conditioning, and so would hand off that part to the professionals, but he would fight against that mindset in his own way, giving Midoriya the care and positive attention and love he deserved. The second emotion he was more familiar with, rage. Rage at the society that perpetuated such harmful behavior, rage against all those who had harmed his cub, and most of all, rage at All Might, the Kamid Med former #1 hero, for not only failing to get Midoriya medical attention after a villain attack, but for crushing a potential hero's ambitions because of his own biases, revealing a national secret to a kid, leaving said kid on a building roof after that devastating news, letting a villain escape resulting in another kid getting taken hostage, not acting until a kid fresh from their own villain attack threw themselves in harm's way, still not getting medical attention for the kid, cornering the kid in an alley when they were probably in shock and offering a quirk without any explanation of what it entailed, including the bone-shattering side effects and attached supervillain nemesis, giving the kid the quirk the day of the entrance exam with no training on how to use said quirk, failing to train the kid on how to use the quirk when it broke his bones, and finally keeping the secret of this whole situation so that Midoriya didn't get the training he needed and the teachers didn't know about the threat they faced. In short, Shouta was said, and a quick look out of the corner of his eye towards his husband confirmed that he felt the same way. However, the crying cub in front of them was the more pressing problem. Midoriya was clearly bracing himself for rejection, and the longer Shouta took to answer the more hurt he saw in Midoriya's eyes. That stopped now. Shouta stifled a sigh, knowing that would be taken negatively by the kiddo, and knelt in front of Midoriya. "Thank you for sharing that with us, Izuku," Shouta said as gently as he could. His cub whipped his head up at the use of his first name, and Shouta let his care and genuine thanks show on his face. "You were very brave to tell us all of that. Can we give you a hug?" Midoriya looked shocked at that. "Why you still want to touch me, knowing I am quirkless?" His cub stuttered. And Kami, if that didn't make his heart break even more. He could hear a short wounded noise escape his sunshine at that remark. "Of course we do," Shouta confirmed, and saw his birdie nodding by his side. "Your quirk status doesn't change who you are. You are still Midoriya Izuku, our student, our ward, and our cub. And as our cub, we want to comfort you and give you a hug. Can we do that?" A fresh wave of tears spilled out of Midoriya's eyes as he slowly nodded. "And no one's ever wanted to once they knew," his cub confessed, and well, Shouta could do something about that. He wrapped his arms around his cub in a comfortable embrace, letting a hand reach up and running his fingers through his cub's green curls. Hisashi joined them in the hug as well, long arms holding them both close. Midoriya sniffled and a new flood of tears poured out as his cub sobbed and leaned into the embrace. Shouta let him, holding him steady in his outpouring of emotion, wondering if anyone had ever comforted his cub during a breakdown. Knowing more of his history, he guessed it was unlikely. He and his husband did their best to soothe their young charge, and Midoriya eventually gathered himself enough to clean his face with a tissue his sunshine provided. Shouta continued to pet his cub's curls as he restarted the conversation. "We are proud of you, cub. I know that was hard to talk about," he said gently. "Do you want to continue this conversation another time? We've all been through the emotional ringer and there's no harm in taking a break." Midoriya hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. I want to know what's going to happen with my his cub said shakily, but clearly wanting an answer to what he asked before. Shouta looked over at his birdie and let him take the lead. Zashi unfortunately had more experience with this after all. "First, Izuku, do you think what your mom did was wrong?" his husband asked softly. Midoriya seemed to be thinking hard for a long moment, and then shook his head again. "I know what Hisashi did wasn't normal, but IW is fine." His cub tried to explain. "She shouldn't be punished when nothing happened." "But something did happen," Hisashi pointed out. "She wasn't there to notice the bullying and talk to the school about it, and she didn't help you get treatment for your injuries. That could have easily gotten really bad, cub. Even discounting the legal problems, what she did was dangerous." Izuku was still shaking his head, but it was slower now. "That was all because I am quirkless," his cub protested. "She couldn't do anything about it." Even if that was the case, which it is not, what happened was still morally wrong, Hisashi explained softly. "Let's think of it this way. You have a friend in school like Uraraka. They are kind and smart but are bullied and suicide-baited, and the teachers at school don't do anything, or worse, join in. When you ask about how they are doing at home, they say their mom and dad both left them at a young age and they live alone. Would you think that was a good way to treat your friend?" "No." Midoriya shook his head vehemently. "Uraraka is good. She didn't deserve that." Shouta noted that his cub's fierce protection of his friends overcame his anxiety. Now, what if Uraraka said that the reason this happened was because she was quirkless? Hizashi continued. Was that still a bad way to treat your friend? Yes, Midoriya replied after a moment, clearly seeing where this was going. Beep. His cub trailed off before he could finish his thought. Just like Uraraka, you too deserve to be cared for and safe from harm, Hizashi said firmly, letting his conviction steal his voice. Everyone deserves love, care, and safety. Midoriya didn't dispute that, but was clearly thinking very hard. Shouta knew that his mindset wouldn't change in a day, but it was good that his cub wasn't just dismissing it outright. We know that what we just talked about may be strange to hear, and may not line up with your experiences, Shouta joined in, but just keep thinking about it, alright? You can even bring us your questions about it next time. Midoriya nodded and rolled the fidget toy around his fingers. Now, let's talk about your mother. Hizashi could tell his husband was seething and was having a hard time keeping it under wraps. Not like Hizashi was any different. Hearing what their owlet had gone through made him want to burn their society to the ground in revenge. This whole stupid fascination with quirks and their strength and flashiness and usefulness and appearance clearly only caused more problems than solutions, as Hizashi's, his Starlight's, and the Lil listeners' experiences could attest. Sometimes Hizashi wished that the rat god would speed up his plans for world domination because even if Nedzu was a sadistic little bastard, he was at least smart about it. Because Kami did it hurt to see how society's views on the quirkless had caused Izuku to feel like he had no worth, just existing as something to be punished. As far as Hizashi knew, the owlet probably had nowhere to feel safe. Hizashi had felt safe at school, and that brought him a lot of strength and bravery when having to return to his parents and their cage of a house, knowing that there was a place he could flee to. His kitten, with his horrible school life, at least had his parents to lean on before they passed. But the Lil listener had been accosted from all angles with no respite and end in sight. The fact that Izuku was still here was a miracle, and Hizashi wanted to keep it that way. Which meant dealing with Midoriya Izuku. Finished talking to their owlet about what was wrong about how he was treated, and Hizashi could tell they'd have to revisit this topic many times before the Lil listener took it to heart, but that was okay. He knew how long healing could take, and was prepared to give Izuku as much time as he could. Now, let's talk about your mother, his husband said, and tilted his head towards Hizashi, indicating that he should continue to lead the conversation. Having gone through a pretty similar process with his own parents, Hizashi knew the most about it. Legally speaking, there is a pretty strong case against Midoriya Izuku, Hizashi said frankly, not wanting to sugarcoat it and give the owlet false hope. Firstly, abandoning a minor is illegal, and even if she were to argue that she did provide you aid in the form of the apartment you were living in and the inadequate stipend for food, it would still count as neglect, both of which would still result in prison time. The Lil listener was listening intently, clearly looking for any loopholes. Hizashi kept an eye on Izuku's reaction as he continued. Secondly, she confessed her treatment of you in front of Detective Tsukachi, Hizashi said, remembering how she had been eager to air her complaints about her useless son before realizing that the detective was not on her side. Aside from confirming what was discovered about how you were treated as the truth, by doing so to an officer of the law means that even if Sho and I were to say that there was some mistake with the arrest, and to drop the charges against her, the government would press the charges themselves, so she would be taken to court either way. The owlet frowned and bit his lip, probably disappointed that he couldn't convince his teachers to get his mother free. Then Hizashi dealt the last and most devastating blow. Finally, even if she were to argue that she was doing all of this because you were quirkless and had ruined her life, Hizashi said gently, hating that he had to convey that likely scenario, which is completely incorrect, so don't take it hard, but legally, you do have a quirk. The court will see your late bloomer status and could interpret it as Mrs. Midoriya treated you so poorly as to cause a quirk to manifest, which comes with serious legal consequences, including longer prison time and a more max security prison. The listener opened his mouth and made as if to protest, but sensing what Izuku was about to say, Hizashi held up a hand and the owlet waited. If you were to say the truth about your quirk status and how you got it from All Might, It would still paint your mother in a bad light because being so desperate as to accept a quirk with unknown consequences from a stranger, even if they were All Might, points to something clearly being wrong with your previous circumstances. Additionally, Mrs. Midoriya didn't intervene or protest the arrangement, which also points to neglect. Hizashi continued, and he could see the listener falling deeper into despair with every word he said. Shouta sensed it too and held Izuku closer in the hug. Even if that did convince enough members of the jury to allow Mrs. Midoriya to be let free, you would be putting a huge target on yourself, All Might, your classmates, and your mother. Not only would the League and All for One be after you and anyone they think you might care about, so would every villain and criminal. Everyone would be wanting to capture you and take the quirk, by any means necessary. The owlet's face crumpled as he realized that he would be putting everyone in danger by revealing his quirk, including his mother, who he was fighting so hard for. He started sobbing, and Hizashi joined in on the hug that his husband was already initiating. The listener cried large tears, clearly heartbroken that all his attempted plans would cause more harm than good and wouldn't save his mother. But what can I do? Izuku blubbered, overwhelmed. I don't want Mom to go to prison. I know it is hard, Hizashi tried to soothe the distressed teen. It will be a very big change. But prison isn't so bad. She hasn't used her quirk illegally, so she wouldn't be held with villains, just criminals. If she pleads guilty, as any good lawyer would advise her to do, she could argue that she suffered psychological distress from her husband leaving and your diagnosis, and she wasn't in her right mind in how she treated you. If she shows remorse in her actions, she could have a very short sentence in a minimally secure prison with non-violent offenders, and could get released early for good behavior. If there is a basis for psychological illness, she could be put in a mental hospital instead, and not go to prison. Their owlet sniffed and seemed to consider Hizashi's words. Did change after Hisashi left, the listener said slowly. Hizashi privately thought that Mrs. Midoriya wasn't mentally unstable, just a quirkist bigot who valued her husband and public opinion over her own son, but it was a likely argument for a lawyer to take, so he let Izuku continue to think about it. Some time apart and being treated with care would hopefully allow their owlet to heal and recognize the harm that was done before Mrs. Midoriya got out of prison. The listener continued, could I get a good lawyer for Mom? Can I testify for HR? If that's what you want, we can talk with Nedzu about getting one of the UA lawyers to represent Mrs. Midoriya, Sho answered. As far as testifying, you could ask them if it would help your mom's case. But in my personal opinion, I'm not sure testifying would be good for your own mental health. You would have to recount the details of what happened, and you would be cross-examined, which is harrowing in itself. I would want a therapist to assess you before letting you testify. Izuku pursed his lips and Hizashi could see that he was uncertain about going to therapy. Even if your mom wasn't on trial, we would still want you to see a therapist, Hizashi explained. You have experienced a lot of traumatic events this year, and having someone to talk to about it and help you process it can be invaluable. Sho, and I and lots of other pro heroes go to therapy. It does not mean you are weak or lazy, just that you have gone through something hard, alright. Their owlet nodded and looked up at them with wet eyes. I'll do it, the listener stated firmly, anything to help my mom. Izuku was confused. And sad. And excited? He wasn't sure how to describe the bubbly feeling taking root in his stomach that lifted a weight off his shoulders when his senseis still wanted him around after he told them he is quirkless. Even if he has a quirk now, he still doesn't think of it as his, just a gift-curse opportunity from All Might that he has to protect. But still, he was mostly confused. Nothing about how the meeting with his senseis and his confession had gone the way he expected. He had expected that his senseis would understand that what his mom had done was normal for the quirkless, and would let her go free. He had expected that Aizawa sensei would expel him for lying about his quirk status. He had expected that they would have wanted nothing more to do with the quirkless kid, and would turn their backs on him, as so many had done before. He had expected all of that, and had accepted it, knowing it would result in the death of his dream but would help his mom. And he told himself it was worth it. Was it truly worth it though? His mom had left him just like everyone else. He had thought that she was different. Izuku ignored that little niggle of doubt and shook his head. But none of that had happened. He had told his senseis the truth, and they still supported him. They still wanted him to be in their class. And they still thought that what his mother had done was wrong, and would not drop the charges. It stung that not only had his plan not worked, but would not have let his mom free anyway, because of how the justice system was set up. That was another thing he would have to research. If he was going to be a hero, he wanted to know what happened to the people he arrested. He still thought that testifying would be helpful. Sure, Aizawa-sensei and Mike-sensei still treated him the same, but they were one of a kind. He was sure the jury would be able to see how him being a late bloomer would have caused problems for his mom. He would just have to convince the lawyer and the therapist that he could do it. And he would. After all, he had plenty of practice pretending to be fine. The very next day after his shift training and the reveal, Aizawa-sensei and Mike-sensei took him to his first therapy appointment before they went off to their own meeting. They promised they would be there when he was done, ready to support him with whatever he needed. He would be meeting with Hound Dog for the time being, not only because he was the therapist on staff for UA and was therefore most available given the time constraints, but he also was a hero and had the clearance to know the whole truth about Izuku's own situation. Izuku could admit that he was nervous going in, and his senseis definitely picked up on how he was anxiously twisting the fidget over and over again in his hands. The trio stopped outside the office door and Mike-sensei put a hand on his shoulder while Aizawa-sensei crouched in front of him to put them at the same eye level. "There's no need to be nervous, little listener," Mike-sensei said gently. "Hound Dog is a good hero and a good man, and he's a softie under all that fur. You don't have to tell him anything you don't want to, but just try to give him a chance, all right?" Aizawa-sensei reassured him. "You don't even have to say anything if you're not comfortable." "I think Sho didn't say a word to his therapist for the first month," Mike-sensei said jokingly. Aizawa-sensei rolled his eyes but didn't disagree, and Izuku had to stifle a smile. Mike-sensei matched his hidden grin with a proud one of his own. "All you have to do is be yourself," Aizawa-sensei said, "and if for any reason it doesn't work out, we'll be right here and we'll help you look for a different therapist, okay, Cub?" Izuku nodded. He liked it when Aizawa-sensei called him Cub. It was the nicest thing he had ever been called, and it made him feel supported. Mike-sensei squeezed his shoulder as Aizawa-sensei stood up and patted him on the head. Izuku took a deep breath and opened the door to Hound Dog's office and stepped inside. Izuku wasn't sure what he was expecting a therapist's office to look like, but this seemed more casual than he would have thought. The walls were painted a light yellow and bright sunlight streamed in from some large windows. There was a desk pushed into a corner, but Hound Dog was sitting on a comfy-looking armchair that was across from a plush sofa and another matching armchair. The hero wasn't in his costume, and was instead wearing a pair of round glasses and a comfortable-looking short-sleeve sweater and slacks. Looking like this, the fearsome hound hero seemed more like a support animal than a feral hound. He looked up as Izuku walked in and put away a small notebook he had previously been writing in. "Welcome, Midoriya," the therapist said in a surprisingly soothing voice. "Feel free to take a seat anywhere." Izuku nodded and found a spot on the corner of the sofa. "As you might know, my name is Inui Ryo and I'm UA's resident therapist," the hound hero explained. "Have you ever been to therapy before?" Izuku shook his head no and continued to mess with the fidget, not quite meeting Hound Dog's eyes. He didn't know the hero well enough for that. "That's all right, I'm glad that you are taking the time to meet with me today," Ryo said. "I know therapy can be a daunting prospect, but showing up is the first step. This first session will just be about me getting to know you. Does that sound all right with you?" Izuku nodded, a little relieved that they wouldn't be tackling the hard stuff right away. This would give him some more time to think about how to convince the hound hero to let him testify. "Before we begin, I want to tell you that as your therapist, anything you share with me will be confidential," Hound Dog explained. "I will not tell anyone what we discussed here, not even your teachers or guardians. The only reason I would share something with an outside party would be if I thought that there was a risk of harm to you or someone else. I will tell you if I intend to do that beforehand. Do you have any questions about that or anything else?" Izuku shook his head again. He hoped that the therapist would keep his word. He didn't want anyone to be put in danger because of his secret. "All right, let's get started then." Shoyuta was feeling out of his depth. Their cub had gone through so much, and now he had to re-examine his entire worldview, disregard what society had told him his whole life, and find a sense of self-worth. All of this while dealing with the upcoming trial of his horrible mother. Shouta hoped that Hound Dog would be able to help Izuku come to terms with what had happened and help him work through his past, because Kami knows that Shouta is not a good example of how to deal with trauma. Sure, he has gotten better with his husband and therapist's help, but his own guilt over Oboro's death still colors most of his life. Additionally, Shouta was concerned about Mrs. Midoriya's trial. While he does teach hero law, and has some familiarity with the legal system due to Nedzu's training, he hasn't argued for a lighter sentence when the defendant was charged with child neglect before. And he's not sure if doing so now would be the right move. Their cub was clearly not being taken care of, and that led to a lot of concerning behaviors, both being directed towards Izuku and from Izuku himself. It's a miracle that their cub trusts them even a little bit, because Shouta doesn't think there was any adult in his life before that treated him as they should. Right now Izuku seems to be clinging to any hope that his mother wasn't doing anything wrong, and Shouta worries that Mrs. Midoriya will show her true colors at the trial, dealing a devastating blow to their cub. They'll just have to express their concerns to the lawyer and Hound Dog and prepare to mitigate the damage when it happens. Luckily, Nedzu had been listening to their conversation about their cub's quirk, because privacy is a foreign concept to the rat god, so had already secured a lawyer for Mrs. Midoriya. Both Shouta and Hisashi had worked with her in the past, and she was known for being non-discriminatory and good with traumatized children while having an impressive legal track record. Thus, Shouta and his husband didn't have to deal with that, leaving them free to track down their true target, All Might. Shouda's feelings towards the former number one were much less complicated. He was said. There were so many things wrong with how he had handled his interactions with their cub, and Shouta was going to get it through his thick skull whether the retiree wanted it or not. Nedzu, in an effort to get back into Shouta and Hisashi's good graces, had called the injured pro into a joint meeting with the two of them. For all his flaws, Nedzu did abhor injustice, especially towards children, and Shouta was sure that the principal wouldn't have hired the walking skeleton if he had known but Might's thoughts on the quirkless and how he had treated Izuku, no matter what the board or HSPC had said. But that was in the past, and now what mattered is correcting their mistakes, and that started with confronting the number one idiot for a second time. Shouta and Hisashi were both stone-faced as they entered Nedzu's office and saw Toshinori already there. The petty part of Shouta was quietly pleased when he saw that Nedzu hadn't offered the retired pro tea, and then gave Shouta and his sunshine a cup of their favorite brews. Shouta nodded at Nedzu and took a sip, then pierced the former hero with a glare that conveyed all of his rage. "We know the truth now, Yagi," Shouta said in a tone he reserved for the worst villains, "so don't try to lie. You have one chance to explain what the hell you were thinking with your treatment of Midoriya before I remove the rest of your organs. So talk." Yagi looked startled at that and turned to Nedzu as if searching for support, but deflated when he realized that no help was coming from that corner. He nervously cleared his throat. What do you mean?" Yagi asked, coughing a bit of blood into a napkin. "Tell us what really happened when you first met Midoriya," his birdie said, a bit of his quirk leaking into his voice and adding a threatening growl to his words. The retiree gulped, but began. "Well, I was chasing the sludge villain after a robbery and it escaped via the sewers," the former pro explained. "When I tracked it down, it had begun attacking young Midoriya. I blasted it away from him and collected it into some bottles. I signed young Midoriya's notebook and he woke up when I checked him over. I was running out of time before I transformed back, so I left, but he had grabbed onto my leg. I landed on a nearby building, and he asked if he could be a hero without a quirk. At that point I transformed back, and of course I said no, because if I had gotten so badly hurt with a quirk, then it was too dangerous without one. I then went to turn in the villain, but it had escaped somehow. It had taken another hostage by the time I tracked it down again, but there were heroes on scene and I was out of time, so there was nothing I could do. I then saw young Midoriya heroically run in and try to save the boy, and his bravery inspired me to push past my limits, so I transformed and dealt with the villain. I handed the villain over to the police and then found young Midoriya and told him that he could be a hero with my quirk." All Might smiled fondly at the memory, but it quickly faltered in the face of Shouta, Hisashi, and Nedzu's combined glare. Yagi, do you see anything wrong with what you did? His sunshine asked dangerously. No, Yagi said, then backtracked. Well, aside from letting the villain escape, but I was distracted at the time. No. Shouta raised an eyebrow. Then I'll break it down for you in a way your pea-sized brain can understand. First, you should have gotten Midoriya medical help immediately after you apprehended the villain. Hell, you should have called for paramedics and police as soon as you had located the villain and realized he had a hostage. But my time limit dash, Yagi interrupted, but Hisashi cut him off. You revealed your true form to Midoriya anyway, so it doesn't matter, his birdie pointed out. And Midoriya could have died if any more sludge had made it into his lungs, so getting him medical help is the priority. Next, why the hell did you tell the kid no? Shouta pressed on. All Might looked confused. Quirkless can't become heroes, it's too dangerous, Yagi protested. They wouldn't be able to fight and they would get hurt. I was just being realistic. Let me stop you right there. His sunshine cut in, livid. Not only was what you just said patently false, it was also incredibly quirkist. Sure, at face value someone who is quirkless might have a disadvantage against someone with a quirk, but everyone has a weakness and someone who is quirkless can target that just as well as someone with a quirk. Even though there hasn't been a quirkless Japanese hero, there are plenty of heroes both past and present around the world who are quirkless. Plus, there are plenty of other ways to fight without using your quirk, Shouta added. When I'm against a mutant quirk, I fight quirkless and still win. And even if you don't believe me, surely you remember your old sidekick, Sir Night-Eye. He hardly uses his quirk at all. Well, I know what it is like to be quirkless, and I couldn't have become a hero with my quirk, Yagi said, digging his own grave deeper. Just because you couldn't hack it, doesn't mean others can't, Shouta said viciously, and I'm telling you now Midoriya would be a great hero without his quirk. And you know why? Because he has the heart, the drive, and the brains, which is more than I can say about you.